All righty. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission this Wednesday evening, February 12th. I now call this meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Robbins?
Here.
Commissioner Rowinski?
Here.
Commissioner Kranz?
Here.
Vice Chair Michael?
Here.
And Chair Narita?
Here.
All present.
Great, thank you. So welcome. We are excited to be here in person with options for those who choose not to be in person to still participate virtually. For those attending in person, please complete a yellow request to speak slip and hand it to the clerk. If participating remotely, use the raise your hand feature in Zoom and you will be called on at the appropriate time. If calling in via phone, please press *9 to raise your hand, and when called upon, press *6 to unmute. These options for public comment will remain available until I close the public comment period for any specific item. Okay, with that, clerk, could you please read the consent calendar?
Certainly. Approve the minutes of the Sustainability and Infrastructure regular meeting of December 11th, 2024.
Is there any member of the commission who would like to pull an item from the consent calendar? And if there are any members of the public who wish to comment on any consent calendar item, now would be the time to make your comment. This is for the consent calendar items only. Madam Clerk, have we received any requests to speak on the consent calendar?
No, we have not.
Okay. Is there a motion from the commission to approve the consent calendar?
Make a motion to approve the consent calendar as indicated.
Second.
Great. May we have a roll call?
Commissioner Robbins?
Aye.
Commissioner Rowinski?
Aye.
Commissioner Kranz?
Aye.
Vice Chair Michael?
Yes.
Chair Narita?
Yes.
5-0.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is public comment. Members of the public wishing to comment on any item that is not appearing on the rest of the agenda may address the commission at this time. State law prevents the commission from taking action on any matter not on the agenda, but your comments may be referred to staff for follow-up. This public comment section is generally limited to a total of 15 minutes. However, that is subject to commission's discretion and can be extended if the commission wishes to do so. And one more note. We welcome speakers providing public comment, but please be advised that this is a limited public forum. As such, speakers must stay on topic if speaking to a particular agenda item, and if speaking during general public comment, they must address matters within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. If speakers fail to follow these rules, they will be warned, and if they continue to disregard our rules, their opportunity to speak will be ended. I will end it, so stay relevant, y'all. All right. Anyone have general public comment?
Madam Chair, we have 6 in-house and 2 online.
Okay, great. And this is all for general public comment for nothing that is on the agenda.
That's correct.
Okay, let's go for it. So with 6, that's 8 total, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. So that will be 3 minutes a person.
Can we see Kelly Ryerson, Lindsay Rake, and Argella Ronde, the first 3? If it's not about it can't be about the appeal. Okay. I understand. So, okay, Kelly and Lindsay.
So again,
and
the
Argella.
general public comment is for anything that's not on the rest of the agenda, and it has to be on a topic that this commission has jurisdiction over and has relevance to this commission. I think this would be the appropriate time to do so, yes.
Well, it's good to see all of you guys again. I just wanted to make a statement, which you guys are probably aware of, that the No Sellouts of San Mateo team worked really, really hard for well over a year to get the new ordinance passed, and we're so thankful for that. But it's heartbreaking to see that some of these applications were shoved in last second, and it doesn't seem fair because they are not following the same rules that are insisted upon in the new ordinance. And so just on behalf of the San Mateo residents that have really fought hard for this, we would really love to see that you guys might be able to either apply the new ordinance or strictly enforce the older ordinance that did have parameters to which you could reject some of the applications that are coming up today.
Okay, again, if it's about any of the applications,
Oh, okay.
then it's not a general public comment anymore. So
Okay,
if
can
you'd
I
like
do
to
it?
save it for the application itself, that's fine.
Well, I just want to make actually another comment. If you look at the map and you see where the small cell facilities are proliferating, you can see it's in the property values that are a lot lower than the rest of San Mateo. And that is heartbreaking to me because there wasn't much voice from those neighborhoods during the time of the ordinance. And I feel like Crown Castle took advantage of it and they've really set up a large network there. And that's not fair from the standpoint of where the radiation is hitting the lower income communities. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And again, reminder, radiation is not something that this commission has any jurisdiction over. The RF emissions is a federal issue, and so we will not be accepting any public comment that talks about RF emissions. Appreciate your understanding at the limited public forum that we have today. And again, it's just about stuff that the commission can really, take some action on. And again, with the comments, we won't be able to take action today, but they can be directed to staff. Thanks so much.
Good evening, Chair Narita and commissioners. The devastating fires in Los Angeles are a sobering reminder of why we must be extremely cautious about the infrastructure we allow into our neighborhoods. Fires linked to telecom equipment failures, like those caused in Silverado, Woolsey, and Malibu Canyon, show us the real dangers these installations pose. When a cell tower catches fire, firefighters cannot extinguish it through conventional means until the power is cut. This can often take up to an hour. That's an hour which flames can spread uncontrollably, especially in high winds, putting homes, schools, and lives at risk. As insurance providers pull out of California due to wildfire concerns, taxpayers are left to bear the financial burden. Some San Mateo residents were relieved when 130 small cell towers were canceled and a stronger wireless ordinance was passed, mandating 300-foot setbacks from homes and schools. But we are not in the clear. As Kelly just mentioned, several small cell facility permits were rushed in through the old, less protective ordinance, forcing residents to fight again for our safety. Tonight, I urge you to listen to the community and uphold the appeal against these hazardous installations. We cannot afford to be reactive when it comes to fire safety. We must be proactive. These towers are not just an aesthetic issue, they are a fire risk, a public safety risk, and a threat to our future. I urge you to remember why we are all here, to ensure the public safety of the people you serve. As commissioners, you must use your power to prioritize public safety and deny future permit applications. These are the kind of decisions that will have long-lasting impacts on our neighborhood, on our families, and on our most vulnerable residents. Thanks.
Thank you. And again, if it's about the actual application, we cannot accept that public comment, and I will cut the next person off. Okay? I really appreciate the remainder of the comments, though, about fire in general. That's on topic. I just want us to get a little disciplined on this, and I really appreciate your partnership on it. Thank you. Please continue with public comment.
Argrella?
That's totally fine.
Okay.
That's totally fine.
Marita?
But you kind of see the distinction we're trying to make here. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Marita, and then Irina, and Linda Sanfilippo. Marita? Irina, you're going to go? Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, commissioners, for being here on a rainy evening. So this is, again, general comment, not specific to this appeal tonight. For over a year and a half, we have observed and endured significant disruptions within our neighborhoods from Crown Castle's installation project of small cell wireless facilities. Our streets have been repeatedly torn up, and the placement of industrial equipment in front of homes has altered the character of our community spaces. This has been an intrusion into our residential areas where families live, children play, and community life thrives. Truly where people eat, sleep, and heal. Crown Castle's work this past year resulted in extensive damage done to numerous public and private utilities and property across San Mateo, which resulted in a stop work order from the city. Our concerns are further compounded by the manner in which these projects have been handled. Many previous applications submitted by Crown Castle have been plagued by inconsistencies and omissions, failing to meet the rigorous requirements established by our city policies, design standards, and wireless ordinance. Moreover, the process of approving these applications has not always upheld the high standards our community deserves, partially due to our city staff simply being overwhelmed and understaffed. Instances of permits being withdrawn and resubmitted, appeal hearings canceled last minute after our experts pointed out how faulty the permit application was, is seemingly being done to bypass regulations and public input and has raised serious questions about the integrity of this whole process. The permitting supervisor for Crown Castle stood before your same commission last year and claimed, quote unquote, "We don't want to put these in front of someone's house, obviously." Yet nearly 200 small cell applications were submitted by Crown Castle, with the majority going directly in front of our homes in our residential neighborhoods. We respectfully request that Crown Castle and all involved parties adhere fully to our codes and policies, ensuring that any development within our city honors and the established guidelines and the interests of our residents. It's imperative that the processes designed to protect our community are respected and upheld. Thank you to all the commissioners for your careful attention and commitment to preserving the safety, the well-being, and the character of our community and neighborhoods here in San Mateo. I have 45 seconds left. I just want to make a note that last year when Crown Castle submitted about 197 permits, they put them in front of homes. They claimed we have to put it here. Full requirements were omitted, attachment 10 and 11, which is the alternative site analysis and project narrative, was completely missed. And yet our staff here today approved it because they were overwhelmed and they were not being guided. And Crown Castle took advantage of that. And when our specialists saw that, the new applications that were missing that suddenly were withdrawn and canceled because they knew that they wouldn't do well in an appeal hearing. Thank you so much for all of your time and attention to this. It matters a lot to our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marita? Yes. Barely. Go ahead. Apologies.
Hi, this is the first time I've ever done anything like this. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for doing it.
I might totally fumble this, so I apologize if I cross a line. I just want to talk, I'm actually a professional engineer, but this is not my area of expertise. I've tried to learn as much as I can, but it's very difficult to get information about what's going on with these small cells and what they do, which is kind of frustrating from a community standpoint. I feel very much back on my heels. It's hard to even see these signs with all the storms and stuff. They're all on the ground, but it's like, it's a super saturation of a small area with these small cell towers. Within a 2-block radius of my house, there's 4, I don't know if they're approved applications anyway, but there's no technical reason why you need that many cell towers to service our community. And so we will do our part in our community per the federal government, but we should at least challenge Crown Castle to say, hey, this is to service our community. And if it's not servicing our community, then we shouldn't take the burden of the tower. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary Lee. You did great.
Linda Sanfilippo?
Thank you for that self-monitoring. I really appreciate it.
Mike Squire online. Go ahead,
Can you hear me?
Mike.
Yes, we can hear you, Mike.
Hi, Al. Yes. Hey, everyone. Thanks for your service to the community. We appreciate it. I'm calling in to express my extreme dismay with the catastrophic decision of the City Council a week or two ago in deciding to rip out the newly installed bike lanes on Humboldt in North Central. North Central is an equity priority area. It has the highest crash rate in the city of San Mateo on local roads. There are 6,000 students that go to school there, including some of as young as 6. It's really people in the community are shocked by this decision. A couple of problems. First of all, there was a lack of process. 3 years ago, the Sustainability and Infrastructure Committee voted 5-0 unanimously in favor of the bike lanes, assuming that the city promised to install some of the parking mitigation strategies that would ease the burden on those losing parking, not those, but the community not having as much parking. And now a decision's been made without referring back to the Sustainability Committee. We were told that no decision would be made at this meeting, and yet the headline the next day is San Mateo commits to ripping out bike lanes. That's intentionally misleading. There was a lack of outreach, which is quite ironic because we were told that one of the reasons that we were revisiting this is that there was a lack of outreach during the original process, even though they sent out about 5,000 mailers. The city did not notify anybody who currently uses the bike lanes until 4 days in advance of the meeting. This seems like an intentional mechanism to prevent those who actually use them, bike lanes, from speaking out. The decision was largely emotional and not data-based. The city did spend about $10,000 to do a survey of bike usage to respond to community allegations that nobody uses the bike lanes. Those surveys suggested that about 10,000 rides per month were occurring, which is plenty. And yet Mayor Newsom said that when he walks the neighborhood, he doesn't see any bikes. Why do we spend $10,000 of community taxpayer money if council members are going to do their own survey and disregard scientific professional studies? And again, the reason that this was done was because that there's an assumption that there is not enough parking, and yet there was no parking study done. So once again, it seems like the fix is in and people are very frustrated about it. There's also a false narrative in terms of whether or not there's support for the bike lanes. The city's own survey said that a majority of San Mateo residents support the bike lanes. A plurality of North Central residents support the bike lanes, and only those living on Humboldt proper, that is a couple dozen people, oppose the bike lanes because of the loss of parking. There was too much emphasis. Councilwoman Swerko-Gadicki said that most long-term residents oppose the bike lanes. She did not disclose that most new residents are in favor of the bike lanes. Why do people that have lived here for longer than others have more of a say in terms of whether or not we should have safety on our streets? The opposition to the bike lanes is led by—
Thanks, Mike. Mike, you're at time.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
Thank you so much.
Next speaker, Allison McQueen. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Allison McQueen. I'm a San Mateo resident and a Safe Streets advocate. I'm also very disappointed that the city of San Mateo is creating a plan to rip out almost 40% of the Humboldt Street bike lanes, the longest bike lanes in San Mateo, which will reduce safety for cyclists and destroy what little cycling network we have in San Mateo. The proposal to add a supposed bicycle boulevard on a to-be-determined parallel street in North Central, all of those streets are very narrow, is foolhardy and unsafe. Many others agree. 562 people have signed our petition to support the bike lanes. Public comment was 45-12 in favor of the bike lanes at the city council meeting. A San Mateo Daily Journal poll showed 85% of people support keeping the bike lanes. The San Mateo Foster City School District Board of Trustees unanimously signed a resolution to support the bike lanes. And in the past 2 weeks, 8 San Mateo school PTAs representing thousands of families have voted to sign on to a letter supporting the Humboldt Street bike lanes, with other PTAs voting in the coming weeks. This is a strong coalition of support for safe bicycle infrastructure in San Mateo. The project cost is estimated to be $2 million, not including staff time, to increase the parking supply by 100 spots or $20,000 a spot. The unspoken cost is that this will greatly imperil San Mateo's ability to gain future grant funding for years, costing the city millions of dollars in lost grant funding, could induce liability due to CEQA, and takes valuable staff time away from focusing on projects that increase safety and promote multimodal transit. The SIC approved the lanes 5-0, which was the #2 project on the bicycle master plan, and SIC was not given the opportunity to weigh in or review these current proposals to remove the lanes. With San Mateo's requirement to densify housing, we will not be able to guarantee everyone a parking spot in front of their house. City streets belong to the city and all residents. They are not guaranteed for personal vehicle storage. This decision sets a troubling precedent for the future population growth in San Mateo. More and more folks are biking in San Mateo, and a neighborhood school is opening in North Central this fall with entrances to the school on Humboldt. We want kids to walk and bike to school, but we're removing bike lanes? It doesn't seem smart. At a community meeting in North Central in December, the crowd was united for pedestrian safety, vehicle speed abatement, better pedestrian infrastructure, and improved lighting. But only lighting was approved at last week's meeting. All of this is in light of a very sad trend in San Mateo. We've lost 3 citizens that have been killed by cars in the last 5 months. We must do better. This decision is foolhardy for the future of San Mateo. Thank you for taking action on this matter.
Thank you, Allison.
Madam Chair, that concludes public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for all the public commenters. Kelly, and I'm sorry I didn't catch the second speaker's name. What was your name, ma'am? Betsy? Lindsay? Thank you, Kelly, Lindsay, Irina, Mary Lee, Mike, and Allison. Really appreciate it. All right. So, new business. Now we're going to go to new business, which is the wireless permit approval at 124 Warren Road, permit WC 2024-000243 appeal. And we're first going to hear a staff presentation from JU and company.
All right, thank you very much. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Jay Yu, the engineering manager, and between myself and Ryan Brunmeyer here, we're going to present on the wireless permit appeal for 124 Warren Road. I want to note that we do have a new policy and ordinance, but this appeal is under the old, so the 2021 design standards and ordinance. I just want to put that forward. Tonight, we will be talking about the appeal. In consolidation, we received 6 different appellants in total, but we received the same exact letter in the same appeal basis. So on that note, we will consolidate a lot of the comments and we'll discuss that a little bit later. In terms of the wireless permit review process, we will give a quick overview of what that looks like, but just some quick reminders that there are limitations in terms of the city's authority. Then we'll talk about the appeal process, jump into the background of the permit and the appeal itself, and then ultimately talk about staff's recommendation, and then talk about decisions and next step. In terms of the public hearing, staff has reviewed the appeal and the application, and it does satisfy the 2021 design standards and ordinance, section 1710, and complies with all FCC regulations. The site proposed meets design standard number 1, which is the least obtrusive when looking at the application in totality. All limited exceptions granted were warranted as determined by both staff and our engineering review consultant. So every application, we have a consultant in-house to go ahead and review it. We went through a competitive RFP, and Anchor Engineering is that professional engineering contract that we do contract with. The application for this proposed facility is not subject to NEPA and is categorically exempt from CEQA. So after that, commission action, we're going to ask to consider the appeals and make a motion to grant or deny the appeals. And staff's recommendation for this is to deny the appeals and uphold the conditional approval of the permit. With that said, I think commission is really well versed in this, but I'll go ahead and skim through it. So in the permitting process, there's really 2 phases. In blue, you'll see the application review process, which ultimately applicant will submit a wireless permit. Then a notice is sent to nearby residents within 500 feet. This has to be done within 5 days. And then staff reviews the application per the design standards. Now, the city has limited authority, as I had mentioned earlier, pertaining to our design standards that have been adopted. but really pertaining to aesthetic standards, as well as each application when we review it, even in the same location, has to be on its own merit. So keep that in mind. We cannot regulate RF emissions, coverage and capacity, as well as service. Those things are just out of our control. So after we review that and we deem the application complete, we go ahead and issue what we call a conditional approval. That then gets posted on the website. Everyone that subscribes will get a notification, all interested parties in there, and they get 5 days to appeal the conditional approval. So if there are no appeals within those 5 days, then the conditional approval moves towards the official approval and the wireless permit is granted. Now, if there is a valid appeal, we go ahead and review that process. We then come to the commission here, and here we are tonight. This is why we're here. If it is granted in terms of the appeal, then we go ahead and cancel the application. And if the applicant wants to resubmit, they can do so. Now, if the appeal is denied, then we go ahead and move forward to the official approval. Now, keep in mind, we have to do this whole entire process within the FCC shot clock. So that's either 60 days or 90 days, depending if it's a new facility. In terms of the appeal process, we have our section 1710 clearly defined. I'm just going to say one more time, submit an appeal within 5 days. The appellant has the burden of proof. And then city standards that we will discuss will be site location, pole selection, and design criteria are considered. In terms of FCC regulations, appeals will not be permitted if based on environmental effects from RF emissions that comply with all applicable FCC regulations. And then just to consider and something to note, other city limitations. We cannot control capacity coverage objectives of providers. Not up to us. Property values is something that has commonly been brought up and was brought up again in this appeal, one of 30 points. It is out of our purview. We have no authority on it or no objective criteria. And when we consider the appeal tonight, please consider it within the confines of the appellant's 30 points that we will talk about. So on that, I'm going to hand over to Ryan, and he'll go ahead and talk about the background as well as the appeal.
All right, so the background on this permit, the applicant was Crown Castle. The location is in front of 124 Warren Road. It was submitted on October 22nd, 2024. The decision was posted on January 17th, 2025, and the appeals were submitted by January 22nd, 2025. The subject permit is located on Warren Road, approximately 400 feet from Hurlingham Avenue. And the proposed location is on a wood utility pole, which is shown here in blue. The red dots indicate all other existing poles within 500 feet that were analyzed by the applicant. And they were all found to be unacceptable due to PG&E requirements or coverage and capacity objectives. And I do want to just clarify that there were no alternate poles within 500 feet of the site that were identified as feasible alternatives. And the full ASA can be found near the end of attachment 3 of the agenda. Here are 2 photo simulations of the proposed facility. The map on the left shows which perspective each photo is taken from, the right-of-way within Warren Road. And here you can see it's installed on a wood utility pole with a side-mounted mast arm antenna. Some additional background on the appeal. There were a total of 6 separate appellants that appealed this application. Each appellant submitted the same 30 positions as to why the application should be appealed. Staff summarized all 30 positions into 8 categories below, which can be discussed in more detail in the next slides. The full 30 positions can be found in attachment 2 in the agenda. So the first category has to deal with the appellant's positions on items related to the alternative sites analysis. The appellant's position is that the ASA, also known as the alternative sites analysis, failed to demonstrate the proposed location is the one that best meets the 2021 design standards and ordinance. And that the applicant failed to demonstrate that only sites within 200 feet are technically feasible, and the applicant failed to demonstrate why less obtrusive sites within 500-foot radius are technically infeasible. Crown's response is that with regard to the 200-foot technical limitation cited in the ASA, they will not have achieved the immediate project coverage objective as the wireless signal rapidly deteriorates at around 200 feet. And so in other words, the equipment will function, but the strength beyond 200 feet from the facility will be at much lower levels, thereby failing immediate project coverage objective. Trees and other vertical structures disrupt the signal. And they also provided an attached document that visualizes this, which we'll go into next. Staff determined there was sufficient information, and staff consultant with our internal RF consultant on limitations of the technology. And they confirmed a reasonable range for these facilities anywhere from 200 and 300 feet, with 300 feet being the most ideal condition of no interference. And then all other sites that were within the 200-foot range were demonstrated to be infeasible with specific citations to the applicable PG&E standards. So this exhibit provided by Crown shows how the signal strength can quickly change from good, which is shown in green, to poor, which is shown in yellow, to bad, which is shown in blue. And at around 200 feet from the proposed site, the signal strength shifts from poor to bad. And just a reminder that this does not take into account any loss in signal strength that may be attributed to the surrounding buildings or trees at the site. And there are a significant amount of trees within the vicinity. Category 2 has to deal with the design standards least obtrusive. The appellant's position is that the proposed location is not at the least obtrusive location possible. The Crown's position is that all other locations that were identified as unfeasible per the alternative sites analysis and the 2021 standards state that they should be installed on existing poles whenever technically feasible instead of installing a new freestanding pole. Staff determines it in compliance with design standard 1. And again, they demonstrated that all their sites within 500 feet are not technically feasible. And they identified any that maybe were unable to be installed per the specific GEO95 standard, and that the proposed location is the least obtrusive available. Category 3 had to deal with environmental issues. The appellant's position was that the application does not comply with CEQA and NEPA. Crown Castle's response is that they are not subject to NEPA and CEQA. Similarly, city's response is that we determined they fulfilled the application requirements per the 2021 code, that they need to comply with all applicable federal, state, and local requirements. NEPA review is triggered when a federal agency is involved, which is not applicable here, and they are exempt under CEQA. Category 4 has to deal with fire risk. So the appellant's position was that the application failed to address fire risk associated with the facility. Crown's response is that fire risk is not applicable to the site. They also stated that the project is on a PG&E pole and it was approved by PG&E. City's response is that staff determined there were no requirements under the 2021 design standards and ordinance that requires us to assess fire risk. Category 5 had to deal with incomplete errors or errors in the application. The appellant's position was that the applicant submitted an incomplete application with notable errors, which included issues with the pole owner authorization from PG&E, incomplete submittal on the project purpose and technical objectives, and issues with the engineer's stamps on documents being expired. Crown's response is that they have fulfilled the application requirements and also clarified that Crown's approval letter for PG&E is still valid. The city's response, we reviewed these items in basis category 5 and determined that a complete application was submitted with all the requirement documents that met the application requirements. More specifically, the project purpose and technical objectives references the site-specific drawings, which can be referenced for the proposed location, centerline height, and equipment configuration. We also verified that all engineer stamps were valid at the time the documents were produced and confirmed their licenses are still current and valid. Talking a little bit more about the project purpose and technical objective document. This document is essentially the big picture behind Crown Castle's efforts to increase coverage and capacity with each application. It does contain a lot of similar language as other applications because other applications do have similar, if not the same, project purpose and technical objective. Where that does get into site-specific information, they will reference the specific drawing and plans, which include all the relevant information that is specific to a given site. And essentially, when reviewing an application, we'll take a look at this document, as well as all the plans, the alternative sites analysis, and all the other required attachments before making a determination or decision on the application. Category 6 had to do with the RF emissions. The appellant's position was that the applicant failed to discuss if the antenna tilts and if the RF emissions would be analyzed at all other potential angles and orientations that the antenna could be put in. Crown's response is that, they fulfilled the requirement as demonstrated by our approval. City's response states that per the 2021 design standards and ordinance, we're only required to analyze the RF emissions based on the orientation of the antenna as depicted in the plans, which the applicant has done. They are not required to analyze RF emissions for alternate positions or angles, and they're only allowed to construct the facility in the orientation as depicted in the approved plans. The RF report was also reviewed and approved by the city's third-party RF consultant. Category 7 had to do with the limited exceptions that were granted. The appellant's position is that the applicant failed to justify a variety of the variances. They're actually referred to as limited exceptions in our code. I just wanted to clarify that. The applicant's position is that the Crown has fulfilled the application requirements and the necessity of the variances are fully described in the variance document. City staff have determined that the application has submitted sufficient justification to be granted the limited exceptions in accordance with the 21 ordinance and design standards. And the applicant's limited exceptions requests were granted because the specific design standards conflicted with GO 95 requirements, and granting them would only leave the option of a new freestanding pole, which is the least preferred option under the 2021 design standards. And then category 8, the appellant's position regarding just miscellaneous items, such as the applicant failed to hold a community meeting, the applicant lacks sufficient financial protection, Crown Castle has a history of non-compliance with construction, lower property values associated with this. Crown's response is that they are not required to host the meeting and that they fulfilled all application requirements. The city's response, per the 2021 design standards, the neighborhood meeting is not required. In addition, they do have a master license agreement with the city, which fulfills their indemnification requirements. And all other positions within this category are just not within the scope of a review of the 21 design standards. So for staff's recommendation, the application satisfies the 2021 design standards and ordinance and complies with all FCC regulations. The site proposed meets design standard number 1 for least obtrusive option. All limited exceptions were granted and warranted as determined by both staff and our engineering review consultant. And again, the application for this proposed facility is not subject to NEPA and is categorically exempt from CEQA. Our recommendation is to deny the appeal and uphold the conditional approval of the permit. So for decision and next steps, the commission shall review the appeal and issue a decision. The decision shall be final and not subject to any further appeals. Next steps, if the appeal is denied, the wireless permit will be deemed approved. If the appeal is granted, the wireless permit will be deemed denied. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. All right. So after the staff presentation, we'll have, just for the commissioner's awareness, we'll have the applicant provide a 15-minute presentation, then the appellant, Then the applicant has requested to speak for 15 minutes as well. Then we'll have public comment, and I'll decide the length of each person's public comment depending on the number of people. Then there will be a rebuttal opportunity. The appellant will have the opportunity to rebut for 5 minutes. The applicant would have opportunity to rebut for 5 minutes. And then at that point, it will be open to the commission to ask clarifying questions. And at that point also, we have the commission's legal counsel, Stephanie Hall, available to ask legal questions. Because as a reminder, Lynn, as city attorney, is not representing or advising the commission. Lynn is available to represent the Public Works Department. Is that accurate, Lynn? Okay, great. Thank you. So I just wanted to disclose all of that to the commission and to the public now in terms of the rest of the process. At that point, after discussion has concluded, then we'll go to the motion and a decision on the appeal. Okay? All right, great. So with that, we have now the appellant will be able to speak and present their case for 15 minutes. Does that work? No, can try again. I don't know if the people on
How's
Zoom.
that?
Try
Is
again.
that better?
Yes, I think the people on Zoom can hear you. Thank you.
We can have technical problems in person too now. My name is Ariel Strauss. I'm counsel for Alicia Woodfall Jones only. And first, I just want to thank you all for the work you did on the new policy, approving that, and the council then moving in to be effective on November 18, 2024. I must start by just objecting to the commission's authority as the new ordinance does shift these types of appeals to hearing officers. But given that I haven't seen any action to end this hearing tonight, I'm going to move forward with my presentation. And this is a situation where there is a variance required. So the applicant acknowledges that the site design as proposed does not meet the city's design standards. There is a extension sideways over the street, and that is also in front of windows, which is identified as a deficiency in the variance, but in fact is a problem, as well as other significant problems. But what that then triggers in the city's own system is that there has to be a demonstration that alternatives that are compliant are infeasible, as well as that the applicant has identified reasonable and clear objectives for their service, that there are no alternatives that are technically feasible, and finally, that approving or failing to approve the site would be a violation of federal law. So I'm going to go through those in turn, and hopefully I'll be able to answer questions for you later at the second half of this hearing. Now, with respect to the infeasibility of placing a top-mounted pole, what the applicants say is essentially GO95, which is the Public Utility Commission's standards for safety and engineering for attachments to utility poles, that Rule 94.4C makes it infeasible. They have a few other citations, but no discussion of the actual dimensions of this specific site, the voltage of the antennas that dictate how far that separation distance must be, the type of bracket they intend to use. In short, there's no way to interrogate the accuracy of that statement, the meaningfulness of it, simply as a citation to the regulations of the Utility Commission. And in fact, they don't even quote the specific portion, of which are several pages, that is applicable. The department has issued an NOI on 535 Clark, which I described in my letter, for essentially the identical language being used on that application. So that's facially not compliant. You also can see that the pole itself is about 5 feet of pole height above the antenna, above the energized wires. So depending on the voltage of those wires, it could be technically feasible to put a top-mounted antenna there. That'd be much less obtrusive and also would obviate most of the need for the variance. Now, turning to, I think, what is actually, in this case, what is probably more of a global problem that you're seeing with these Crown Castle applications is a question about whether there are reasonable and clear service objectives. Now, each of the applications they submit are identical with respect to the clarity, and the reasonableness of these service objectives. Now, we heard in a staff presentation that that's essentially the big picture, but there is no small picture. There's no further discussion of why is this site the preferred site. There's nothing about anything other than the supposed 192 nodes, which would pair back to 50, so that's in fact out of date, or how this site would actually feasibly be associated or relevant to poles on the other side of the city. Rather, what they say is that within 200 feet, they don't have good transmission distance. Now, we don't have any data on that. We don't have any meaningful explanation of exactly how these devices transmit, at what power level would enable them perhaps to transmit further, or why they're not using antennas that other Verizon applications say can meet 500 feet with essentially the same form factor. But instead, what we have is the treatment of 200 feet as a magical stopping point. But the transmission distance of the antenna is less important than the service objective of the applicant. So typically what you will see for other applications in other cities is they identify a target area. And that target area is based on existing coverage in that geographic area that's defined. They identify the number of residents in that area, the nature of the uses, the quality of the speed in that area, and then they will place something in some other location to target that space. So the antenna position here is intended to serve people over there. Here, rather, what they're saying is you can't go 200 feet away because a place where the antenna is, that is the service objective goal, apparently, because if you go 200 feet away, you don't have the level of speed that they want. But if you look at, I don't know if you have it, if you had a chance to look at it, but Crown Castle's map that was provided to staff, you can see the individual houses that are within the 200-foot radius of those 75 dB level of coverage that they assert exists. They also say that essentially a best case scenario, so meaning it would be less than that. Of those 5 or 6 houses, virtually all of them are appealing this. So I frankly don't understand how that is either clear or reasonable service objective to try to serve a few individual single-family homes. If this was a large apartment complex, if this was a train station, if this was a stadium, if this was a thoroughfare, people who need to, whatever they may need to do, I would understand that. But here, I don't understand. There's nothing in the record that would tell you why is it not better shifted over 100 feet, 200 feet? What do you lose, if anything? Now, you can also see on Crown Castle's map where, at least you can impute, the other existing nodes. And in fact, Crown Castle is required to identify what their goals are for the coming 2 years, and they've included that. Now, that doesn't include any sites for which applications have not already been filed. And what you can see from that, and also if you look at the addresses applicable to the other sites that they have applied for, the nearest site is 650 feet. There are other few at 750, the next one at 1,500. So no matter where you position this, according to the information that they're presenting in the record, according to their asserted network plan, there are spaces where the 200 feet simply cannot cover. So it's not at all clear or reasonable to understand why this is the magic site. And in fact, it's uncanny. I think you may have noticed this for all the appeals you've seen. Virtually every single application, and in fact, every application I've seen, there's only one site, always only one. Magically, it's just the one they need. And the one they want, it's the only one. It's uncanny, frankly. And the fact is that the RF doesn't stop at 200 feet. It degrades at some level, and I don't think it even is 200 feet, but let's just work with the number. What is typically done in other places when there is alternative analysis where it is technically feasible, meaning the pole itself could hold the physical equipment, but the service objective is less preferred, they will model what happens from that site. And then you could say, I'll look at it. Okay, fine. So you have 100 feet or 150 feet, and you weigh how you think that works within the values of the city's design standards. Now, another piece that's required in order to obtain a variance are the factual reasons why the alternatives are infeasible. And that also goes to 200 feet. So magically cutting everything off at 200 feet or simply citing to sections of GO 95, those are not factual reasons. They allow no interrogation from me, from anybody else perhaps sitting up there. It simply is someone saying more or less, believe me. The last piece is that the applicant has to show there's an effective prohibition, meaning that the city will seek to enforce the city's design guidelines to the extent that they can, unless the FCC or the federal government says you cannot. And that's essentially how much authority the city is trying to take up on behalf of the public. And there, the case law is very clear. There, the case law tells us that an applicant simply wanting better coverage or wanting slightly more coverage, that doesn't show an effective prohibition of personal wireless services. In my letter, I also explained how many courts are determining, in fact, that simply only applying mobile broadband is not a form of personal wireless service because the federal government's objective is actually to enable a nationwide telephone network. That also is an issue here, but we don't even have to get to something at that level. I think we can rather keep it at a much more local factual level to understand why this application is so backwards. And, I could just quote from a number of the cases that have dealt with this. I would say most recently, actually, it was in October 2024, Berkeley prevailed in a lawsuit that was brought by Verizon also. Verizon here is the carrier that we use in these Crown Castle sites. And the issue there was about having actually much more data, but ultimately it came down to an assertion by Verizon that the area that needed to be served was roughly a few thousand people, and there was no backup to explain how they knew it was that number of people, or exactly what was going to be lost when those people didn't get it. And the city prevailed. The city was advised by the same law firm that this city, let's say the city of Berkeley, was advised by a telecom law firm on that as well. But my point here is that these types of just bold assertions, they are far below the standards that are expected, and what I'm frankly seeing in many other cities where the cities accept that there is an effective prohibition. Now, for instance, just the district courts in Southern California have pointed out that, quote, a site would present challenges and be less than ideal does not meet the standard. Or the thing that the city must do is determine the relative significance of this site as compared to other sites. It's impossible to do that because there is this binary treatment where 200 feet magically doesn't work, less than it does work. And I'll just read you from another couple courts cases from the Ninth Circuit. And it says, in all cases of this sort, those seeking to build will come armed with exhibits, experts, and evaluations. And by urging us to hold that such predictable barrage of mandates that local governments approve applications effectively demand that we interpret the Telecommunications Act so to always thwart average non-expert citizens, that is to thwart democracy. And in a very often cited Ninth Circuit case called American Tower Corp v. City of San Diego, it was a very similar sort of presentation as here, where ATC said, insisted the city accept ATC's conclusion that the existing facilities were least intrusive means without offering feasibility analysis of alternative designs or sites for the city to reach its own conclusions. In effect, ATC would make the applicant, rather than locality, the arbiter of feasibility and intrusiveness, gutting the least intrusive means standard with predictable applicant-friendly results. And the court held the city was not required to take ATC's word that these were the best options, and the same is true here. I want to also lastly just turn to category 7 of the staff report. And here I see something very odd, and I don't have much time, so I'll be brief. There's an assertion here that this site was approved in order to avoid the applicant having the right to obtain a new freestanding pole, meaning had the city denied this one, the applicant just walk in and grab it. But that's not at all how it works. And there are 2 reasons for that. One, an applicant has to apply for a new pole. They can't simply amend this application. It would be a new application. There are a few reasons for that. One, the shot clock is different. It's 90 days, not 60. And the city needs to restart their shot clock, otherwise you're at a terrible disadvantage. So it has to be a new application. The second thing is that the city code requires that the city determine that there is an effective prohibition before granting a variance. They can't weigh these things like say, oh, we think a new standing pole is so much worse, so we're going to avoid that. And you see in a staff report, there is no discussion of an effective prohibition. And I think that's smart because it would be terrible if the city attorney had advised that this constitutes an effective prohibition. That would be a very bad position for the city to be in, and it would not bode well for the future. So what in fact would need to happen is the applicant would have to then come back and seek that standalone pole. But the applicant never asserted they wanted that. That wasn't what this application was. And more importantly, in this specific situation, given that the application was filed on October 22nd, by the time the city determined that was the case and denied it, the new policy would be in place. And they can't walk in and grab a new pool under that policy. Rather, that policy is dictated, and I know that you reviewed it and approved it, and the city council did as well. That new policy dictates that these locations are least preferred. The proximity to the home, the type of residential district it's in, the type of streets it's on, and therefore they have to go through that new process. And that's exactly what should happen. Exactly what should happen. So I think you have everything you need to come to that conclusion. This application is entirely boilerplate. It doesn't come anywhere near to what we're seeing in other cities where applicants are insisting that there's an effective prohibition. You do not have the information you need to evaluate alternative sites and see how that fits with the city's values and expectations and the design standards. And you do have an appropriate alternative that would be totally lawful and compliant, which would be to reject the application for not being sufficient with respect to the requirements in the design standards from 2021. And then the applicant, if they choose to, they'll come back, they'll apply, they may present more information that demonstrates there is an effective prohibition, and the city will treat it appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was the appellant presentation for Alicia, I believe. And any of the other appellants want to say anything at this time? Okay, just wanted to, oh, I'm hearing some rumblings. Any other appellant wanted to say anything at this time? The rest of the 5 appeals, specifically the individuals, the remaining 5, you do have a legal opportunity to, we are legally required to allow you to say a few words if you'd like.
Hi, I'm Nancy Steele. I'm at 136 Warren, very close by to this pool that's being challenged. Thank you, Ariel, for your words. I won't reiterate. However, it seems to me that we should be able to work together to come to a conclusion that satisfies everybody without having a huge dispute about this. Certainly there can be another location for this cell tower that satisfies everybody. And it's evident that this particular site is opposed by every neighbor that lives around it. So I just ask for you to consider moving it to a different location. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay. Any other appellants? All right, with that, we're going to move to the applicant presentation by Crown Castle, I believe. And you have 15 minutes.
Hello, esteemed members of the Commission. My name is Michael Cintron. I am Crown Castle's permitting manager for the Northern California region. In attendance on behalf of Crown Castle today are myself, our permitting consultants Taylor Blandford from Kimley Horn, as well as Tyler Reisetter from Kimley Horn and Suzanne Toller, our counsel from the law firm Davis Wright Tremaine, whom are attending online. Tyler is also the engineer of record on these applications. We are here to provide our expertise and answer any questions that may come up from the Commission during these appeal hearings. We appreciate the time and effort staff has put into reviewing these applications, and we believe that the director's decision to approve the wireless facilities communications permit was proper. We're here today to support the staff's agenda report and its recommendation that the Commission deny the appeals. None of the appellant's contentions have merit, and none justify rejection of the permit application. We believe that our application is fully compliant with the guidelines and the code, accepting the the items outlined in the variance document or the limited exceptions. So I'd like to take a few minutes to have both Tyler Reisetter and Suzanne Toller address a few items brought up by the appellant, and then I'll take a few minutes at the end just to closing statement.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So they should be online.
Go ahead, Tyler.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tyler Reisetter. I'm a civil engineer in the state of California, and I'm the engineer of record for this application. And I would just like to address a couple of points that were brought by the appellant. It's going to be short, as most of the points brought were not related to the ordinance or design standards and are not part of what the commission is considering tonight. So the first thing I want to address is the pole top antenna installation. As noted by the appellant, there's about 5 feet at the top of this pole above the secondary power lines to the top of the pole. Per GO 95 Rule 38 in Table 2, the required clearance between a antenna mounted facility and the mount for that facility and a power facility below, the required clearance is 6 feet. So right there, there is less space at the top of the pole than is required by GO 95 for us to install this installation at the top of the pole. And that 5-foot space is shown in our construction drawings and was noted by the appellant in their presentation. Additionally, it was noted that this pole is directly in front of windows. That is not the case. This pole is situated near a property line between 2 residences, and thus is not directly in the frontage between any building and the street. So therefore is not directly in front of any windows. It is near the property line where it stays as far from any direct line of sight from windows as is technically feasible. So those are the only 2 items I wanted to address for now. I would encourage staff, I would encourage the commission to lean heavily on staff who've done a thorough and just review of these applications, and know that I will also be available for any questions later on this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler.
Suzanne.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to review these applications and all the work that the staff has done. I wanted to address a few points that were made by Mr. Strauss, lawyer for one of the appellants. I think that perhaps Mr. Strauss is sort of stuck in some confusion between the way that traditionally courts and the FCC have looked at what are called macro cells, those very big cell towers that you would see 100-foot towers with 20 antennas on them, and more recent rule changes and decisions from the FCC that deal with this kind of installation, which is a small cell. And I really want to emphasize that what we're talking about today is an antenna, in a radome, which is about 2 feet tall and about 18 inches in diameter, that's installed on an existing utility pole in the public rights of way. And the commission in 2018, the FCC came up with an order called, in part, the small cell order, which wanted to look at ways to streamline and facilitate the rollout of this technology, with the recognition that 5G technology, which is what Crown is installing today, and just the ongoing and growing demands for wireless service, for voice and for broadband, and for all kinds of other applications we all use daily, was growing, and there would need to be a densification, right, of these facilities, and they would need to get into the neighborhoods in order to be able to meet the need for service. And so in that 2018 order, the FCC made clear that you no longer have to show some of the types of things which Mr. Strauss was talking about and are being addressed in some of the cases he cited, like the Berkeley case, which was dealing with a much bigger cell site, or the County of San Diego case, which was also dealing with a much bigger cell site. Instead, right, the FCC has held that the applicants can, and I want to strongly support staff's conclusion on this, that the applicants can determine what their coverage objectives are. And in this case, Crown very clearly put forward a map showing what its coverage objectives were and explained that it wanted to bring 5G service, that it wanted to densify, that it wanted to increase capacity. Those are all completely legitimate coverage objectives. And they gave the area in which they wanted to fulfill those coverage objectives. That information was provided. It's part of the application. It's on page 235 of the agenda packet. And they put that forward. They also did an excellent job of looking at 19 different alternatives within a 500-foot radius, followed to the letter the exemplars which have been put forward by staff as to how to do an alternative analysis, and provided detailed reasons why those other 19 sites either were too far away to work, the 200 feet, they were beyond their 200-foot, the limits of propagation of that particular cell site and the spectrum it uses, right? Mr. Strauss also said something about he doesn't understand why these sites don't have a longer propagation area, a bigger propagation area, but are limited to 200 feet. That has to do with the type of spectrum, right, that Crown is being tasked with using for these sites by its client, Verizon. So, and they looked at each one of those sites, both within the 200-foot and outside of it, and gave very detailed reasons why the other ones would not work. And so we are left with this site at 124 Warren being the sole one within that coverage objective area, which is feasible. And as has been explained, and as staff did a great job of demonstrating, right, it does meet the design standards, except for a couple of limited exceptions or variances, right? And the overall impact of the site, I think is consistent with what the commission was trying to achieve in the design standards. And I really did want to commend you because your design standards say, I think appropriately, that you want that the objective is to balance, right, the need for more capacity, the need for advanced wireless services for the city, but then also balance that with aesthetics, right? But doing all of that to the extent permitted by federal law. And in this case, under the 2018 small cell order that the FCC adopted, which was upheld by the Ninth Circuit here in Pasadena in 2020, and for which the Supreme Court denied cert, establishes clearly that if you materially inhibit the established coverage objective of the applicant, then you do have an effective prohibition. And in this case, right, the Crown has done an excellent job of establishing that there really is no other alternative. And so respectfully, if you deny the permit and you uphold the appeals, you will have effectively prohibited them from providing service and meeting their coverage objectives in violation of the law. And I want to pause because it looks like we are about halfway through our time to give back the mic to Michael in case there's additional points he wants to raise.
Thank you, Suzanne. So I just wanted to close with saying I'd like to bring the focus to what the commission is tasked with this evening. The sole issue before you is whether the appellants have met their burden of proof to establish that the permit approval should be reversed. They have not. The Public Works Director correctly found that Crown's proposed small cell wireless project at 124 Warren meets the 4 criteria set forth in section 17.10.070 of San Mateo Municipal Code. Specifically, Crown's proposed wireless project 1 complies with the relevant sections of the code and the 2021 wireless design standards. 2, it complies with all applicable laws. 3, it complies with all applicable RF emissions regulations. And 4, the permit application was deemed complete by the director. Given those 4 things, there's no legally valid reason to uphold the appeal and deny the permit. If you have any questions, we are here to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. So with that, we're going to move to public comment. And how many public comment speakers do we have?
We have 4, Madam Chair.
We have 4? Okay. You may, yeah, a member of the public may speak at general comment and on a specific item. All right, so do we have less than 10 is my question per our guidance.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so given that we have less than 10 public speakers, each public speaker will be given 3 minutes.
Thank you for your time again. So I just wanted to, just listening to all this tonight, it's really enlightening. But what's really interesting is there's somebody in another city that a mother who directly appealed to Crown Castle, begging them to please move the facility. And it does apply to this for a moment. We were just told tonight that there's absolutely no way none of the alternative sites work. But what's really interesting is after speaking to Crown Castle, where they went saying alternative locations you mentioned were nixed due to this and that, and there's all these deciding factors, and this site has trees surrounding, and this would decrease our coverage significantly, and here we can't. After a series of emails, finally, that person did actually come back and say, you know what, I'm able to move this site. And they did. So they were able to. So after all those emails where it just cannot happen, it's impossible, suddenly, it's possible because someone did a very good thing. And I won't name names and I won't name which city. I have the proof. If your commission wants to see that later, I'm happy to send it. So really interesting how even Jonathan Kramer last year when he did the presentation from Telecom Law Firm, he said, rarely, if ever, will only one location work. And I do believe in the case of Warren, that actually applies as well. I'll bet if we actually made them, show their work, do the math, we will see that more than one location works. They're just probably doing it because it's cheaper for them. And there's a reason that other communities don't want these in front of their homes. And the former executive of AT&T, Bob Cavanagh, was leading in Carmel the group that was fighting to get cell towers away from homes. He says this is for entertainment. This is wireless 5G home internet to be, this is not for personal cell phone service. Which we can ask Crown Castle tonight, is this for phone calls? Is this actually an informational service or a personal wireless service to make a phone call, which is covered under the Telecommunications Act of 1996? I will leave it to the experts to talk about this. I'm not an expert, but I represent hundreds of residents in San Mateo, and more cities are growing and aligning. They do not want this blight in front of their homes, and that includes on Warren. They don't need to see it. Our own code, we're going by the old design standards, say if you can see it from your line of sight from a habitable spot, that is not acceptable. And also, in the alternative site analysis, conclusory statements are not acceptable. There's a lot of things that our code said that you have to have that Crown Castle failed to meet. And my favorite part is where Crown Castle's explanation, well, the staff approved the permit before, so therefore this time it's also valid. Respectfully, our staff approved applications that clearly were faulty because Crown Castle wouldn't have canceled those permits in the past when they saw that there was pushback. Suddenly they were canceled. And if they were valid, Crown Castle wouldn't have done that. And we have numerous examples of that, as I'm sure you know. I hope you uphold the appeal tonight and deny the permit at Warren. Thank you.
Thank you.
Teresa Anthony.
This seems like clearly an abuse of power by the telecommunications company and the city to force a neighborhood to accept a tower that could probably easily be moved across El Camino and make everybody happy. So there's 450 towers going in, I guess, for this 5G locally. And of course, there has to be exceptions for outliers. Just because this big, huge telecom company says it has to be here at 200 feet or whatever, that's really not true. These cell towers can transmit very, very, very far. And to have this community not want that in their neighborhood has to be respected and really accepted. There are other alternatives. You're just not looking for them. And you really need to work with the telecommunications company to up their game and find another location to fulfill their network and not impose on these handful of people that have no power. You have all the power. So I really hope you use it to help the community and let them have a great location without this interference on their telephone poles. There's lots of telephone poles everywhere. Why does it have to be right in their yards? It's a beautiful, beautiful neighborhood. And it's very degrading to see something like that right in your front yard. So I hope you reconsider and go back to the telecom company and really examine all the alternatives, other locations where they can still fulfill their 5G network in this area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve Jones.
Hello. My name's Steve Jones. I'm a first-time speaker, 20-year resident, and I live at 134 Warren Road. And to the one who said that you can't see the cell tower from our window, maybe come over and take a look, because it's directly in line with my daughter's window. In fact, our house is right in front of this. 124 is further set back. So 134 is right line of sight. So we're appealing this cell tower directly in front of our home because of that reason. Since the day I saw this piece of paper stuck in front on the pole, it was just a quiet little notice, but it's had a huge impact, a lasting impact that it could have. And I've witnessed from behind the scenes what's happened. I've witnessed what's happened with this commission and with the city over the past 2 years. I've seen a city unprepared to manage these applications and their long-term implications. I've seen Crown Castle aggressively push its interests, exploiting the lack of preparedness by this city, by this commission, at the expense of the residents. I've seen dedicated activists like the No Sellouts, who you've heard numerous times here tonight, step up to educate city officials and offer fair, reasonable alternatives. I've seen the city pass an ordinance that balances these interests. Very logical, balanced interest ordinance with the necessary infrastructure that the Crown Castle is proposing. And I've seen Crown Castle bob and weave and everything they could possibly do to keep their interests alive, filing application after application, exploiting timing loopholes before the new ordinance can take full effect. It's unbelievable. But now I see something else. I see reasonable alternatives. 4 power poles within eyesight of my house that could be used. And they're on islands, away from houses. Very logical places to put this type of infrastructure. And they would align with the current ordinance that you've passed. I see no justifiable reason why these locations were not prioritized. I have not seen any data, anything to suggest why these won't work. Show me the data. Were they deliberately ignored by Crown Castle? What's their interest? Why is our house so special? Why is this magic pole so special? Haven't seen it. Were they dismissed, or were they just dismissed by the city? I see a decision before you today that will determine whether the city will truly listen to the residents or fold under its own bureaucracy. I don't see a valid reason why this tower must go in front of my daughter's windows. I don't see why the city would prioritize island trees over the very people who live here. I don't see how anyone could look at the situation and not recognize the injustice. Don't let the loopholes cloud your judgment. Don't let bureaucracy bury common sense. We have an ordinance. All applications must be required to align with it, past,
Thank you
present,
so
and
much
future.
for your
Thank
comments. And you did great for your first time. Hope to speak again later.
Leisha Woodfall Jones.
Please take your time.
The timing of this was fabulous, you guys. Sorry, I'm getting to. I broke my ankle and I had to have surgery on Friday, so I'm a little
Thank you for being here, and please
I'm
take
a
your
little
time.
chunky. No, it's good to be here. Thank you. Oh, whoops. That's all right. I'm good. Oh, thanks. That's so much better. All right. Hi, I'm Alicia Woodfall Jones. I live at 134 Warren Road. My home is 6 feet from the lot line, 50 feet from the pole. I see it from my breakfast room, my dining room, my front door, my walkway, all 3 bedrooms upstairs, and my living room and driveway. It's a fallacy for them to claim that we can't see that pole. Yes, we have trees, but we still see that pole. Additionally, when I looked at the map that Crown Castle has presented, within that footprint of good coverage are 5 homes and a handful of outbuildings, garages, not even ADUs, pool houses, etc. 4 of those 5 homes are appealing, and I'm proud to say we are all AT&T customers. We don't need it, and we don't want it. I'd like to bring to your attention the photo simulations presented by Crown Castle for the installation at our home. They are misleading, not proportionately accurate, and they diminish the visual impact of the tower. This is important because this tower has not one design variance or what is being called a couple limited exceptions, but 2. The first limited exception allows for a sidearm that is 4 foot 9 inches long. This is 2 feet 9 inches longer than the ordinance allows at 24 inches. This is a 237% variance. I don't call that limited exception. Their photo simulation shows an arm that looks more like it's about 18 inches long. It's very misleading. The second variance allows for a sidearm to be extended over the roadway. The design standard clearly disallows side arms over roadways. Together, these 2 variances amount to a thick arm reaching nearly 5 feet over the roadway with what will look like a painted metal garbage can sitting on the end, looming over the roadway. How was that ever deemed least obtrusive and somehow acceptable? Crown Castle does not justify the need for these variances. They state something about PG&E and that there's not enough space at the top of the pole for a top-mounted design. With 4 feet and an extension on the top of that, this is a false claim because there is space at the top of the pole, it can be extended, and the design standard prefers a top-mounted design as the least obtrusive. I submitted a photo to the commission just before this meeting with a photo simulation that is a more correct depiction, with the proportions showing the sidearm reaching much further into the street with an accurately sized canister. It shows that the 4 feet space also at the top of the pole. I urge the commission to question Crown Castle, probe for their information, think about it independently, thoughtfully, and
Thank you so much for your
objectively.
comments. Please don't rush. Please take your time.
Linda Sanfilippo.
If it's been covered, then you can just reinforce that it's been covered and not provide public comment. But if you have any new information you'd like to share, we welcome that. Just if you don't mind coming up so that folks on Zoom can hear you. But you don't need to cover any content that's already been covered.
Okay, so
Thank you, Linda.
Okay, let me make this brief. All of Crown's outstanding permits are concentrated in the park right now, with one exception on North Claremont Street. They have all been approved not once, not twice, but 3 times by an understaffed Public Works Department lacking crucial technical expertise. Residents have repeatedly appealed Crown's resubmissions, exposing their clear violations of San Mateo's 2021 small cell ordinance. Each time an appeal was filed, Crown withdrew its application, fully aware they could not prevail in a hearing. Let's face it, you don't withdraw an application that is compliant with the ordinance. It is time for Public Works to confront the mistakes made in approving these flawed permits, hastily submitted just days before the new ordinance took effect. Residents understand the overwhelming volume of applications the department faced, but Crown Castle exploited the situation, manipulating the process with repeated withdrawals and resubmissions. We must unite residents and officials alike against Crown Castle's blatant disregard for our city's governance and the integrity of our neighborhoods. Enforcing compliance with our small cell ordinance is not just necessary, it is imperative. Otherwise, why even have an ordinance? Crown remains non-compliant despite multiple attempts, and it's time to deny these applications once and for all and restore justice to our community. If Crown Castle is serious about adhering to our standards, they can submit a new application that aligns with our ordinance. Let's stand firm and uphold the regulations that protect our neighborhoods and ensure San Mateo remains an exceptional place to live. And I think I just want to add, and looking at all this, if you guys can really hone in on the alternative site analysis and look at their reasoning for why other sites were technically infeasible. It's an eye opener. A lot of their reasoning, they'll cite and they manipulate these geo standards. They'll say geo 95 standards, radio cannot be placed above the electrical lines. But the actual proposed site, they want to put this below the electrical lines. So they use this as a way to manipulate it. So you think, oh, it can't be used. See, it says it can't go above the electrical lines. Please pay close attention to the alternate sites analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Silence Dogo.
Good evening, SNI commissioners. I want to remind you of a presentation that I made to you and to this council, and I want to review that. That video demonstrates and definitively claimed by the CEO of Verizon says that these towers have a coverage of 3,000 feet. So when we have a group like Crown Castle who comes in and says every 200 feet, somebody is not telling the truth. So I think that's the mic drop moment of the evening. Follow the 3,000 feet that the CEO has claimed and is driving the growth of his company and has used that as a marketing tool to sell service. Next thing I want to talk to you about is if you're going to challenge an appeal, you have to use real world evidence. Today, in the day of AI, ML, and how we do things, we use real world evidence. So far, the community and the appellant has not seen any real world evidence. Everything is now done based on real world evidence. Next thing, the civil engineer who commented earlier, you're supposed to use not a civil engineer, but you're supposed to use a telecom engineer. There's a big difference. So clearly he lacked expertise. The next thing I want to address with you is the unethical behavior of the applicant, discrediting Ariel Strauss, who has dealt with these small cells, who's familiar with them, who's technically knowledgeable about the background of these installations. Do you want this kind of contractor in San Mateo? There's a lack of good faith here as well. They snuck in the application knowing that we are in the middle of a new ordinance. Do you want this kind of contractor in San Mateo? The lack of respect for our property, unfinished sidewalks, poorly finished poles, while asking for more installations. Do you want this kind of contractor in San Mateo? Please approve these appeals. They are valid. Ariel Strauss has made a valid point. They cover up to 3,000 feet, so these other poles will serve the service as done so. And there seems to be a factual discrepancy between the people today and the CEO of Verizon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Last one, Angela. Rondi? You're good. That's it for public comment.
Okay, great. At this point, we'll close public comment. Thank you so much to all the public commenters. Really appreciate it. I have received a request for a quick bio break and on the commission, so we can take that now. Does that work for commission? Okay, so really appreciate that. Really appreciate our patience. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute, 7-minute. What do you want? What do we think? 5-minute. We're going to take a quick 5-minute bio break. We can take let's do 10. Let's do 10. I don't want to, let's do 10. So quick 10-minute bio break, everyone. Thank you so much. At that point, as a reminder, we have available 5 minutes of rebuttal from the appellant, 5 minutes of rebuttal from the applicant, and then commission questions. Thank you.
Have a minute. Well, So the wormhole would become more inevitable. Yeah, that's it. I'm just giving you the background. Whatever. We're fighting for it. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm making some of and no, every explanation for
Two-minute warning, everyone. 2-minute warning. All right, everyone, thank you for your patience as we took a quick break. If we could reconvene. Let's reconvene. It's been 10 minutes. Don't make me bang the gavel, y'all. Don't make me bang it. All right, banging it. Come on. 10-minute break is over. Okay, thank you so much. So the next part of the agenda is rebuttal. So we welcome a 5-minute rebuttal from the appellant at this time.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. So I would like to respond to a couple of things. The first is this observation or notion that the placement of the pole is between two is on a property line and is not in front of a window. Now, in front of a window is not the language of the policy. Standard number 3 has the terminology of not obstruct views. That's the goal. We don't really care exactly where you position it. The question is, how does it influence views? We submitted a number of pictures and a number of us spoke to it, and it clearly does obstruct views, particularly in that side format. Had it been higher, it would have been much more out of the view frame. But I think what I really should turn to is Crown Counsel's characterization of Ninth Circuit case law. You notice you didn't say that this case law has been rescinded or that there has been overturned in any fashion. It hasn't. Similarly, the Telecommunications Act also has not been amended. What the council did point to, however, the attorney, is that in 2018, the FCC did dictate that the standard should be when the city materially inhibits an applicant's ability to densify a wireless network, introduce new services, or otherwise improve services and capabilities. Those are not magic words. They're not something you just invoke and you say densify and then the pole gets built, or you say that we have a new service. Typically what applicants do, and this was a case in Berkeley, it was a case that was decided on October 2024, that was a broadband facility. It was, yes, it was larger than this antenna, but they were also delivering broadband. So old cases are good cases until they're overturned. And the important fact here is that this application, it doesn't have any discussion whatsoever the manner of densification. It doesn't tell you how dense is the network. Meaning the people there, when they use their phone, and when I submitted into the record in my letter, the FCC map that is based on certifications from Verizon about the ability to have high-speed upload and download, when they did that and determined that there actually is 5G available right now in that location, how has Crown Castle explained that they're improving that? It doesn't help to say that this is 5G, and it doesn't even matter what band they are operating on, whether it's 700 or 28 gigahertz. It doesn't matter. The question is, what is happening from the standpoint of the customer, and how is that being improved? There's no description or discussion of any issues that are existing right now with capacity. There are no numbers about it. There's a reference to dropped calls, but then there's a statement, in fact, in the narrative that they don't have to do any traditional call analysis through drive testing. So it's literally generic for every single site. And every single site is not the same. There actually is Verizon towers are not identified on the map that Crown Castle submitted, and they are transmitting, and people are able to use that service. And I submitted earlier today a FCC verified upload download test that documented that. So I think the notion that somehow the FCC changing the standard means that A, the case law goes out the window, and B, the applicant can just say whatever it wishes and it doesn't make any difference is simply wrong. It's wrong, and it's also not consistent with the city's policy and ordinance. The policy dictates that the applicant identify a clearly identified and a reasonable service goal. And they haven't done that. They simply say, we want a big network of 192 sites. Well, okay, but why not a different site that's also one of 192? There's zero factual information there. I also want to point out that these other sites that are a couple hundred feet away that are in medians, they're much far superior. They are further from homes. They're obscured by trees from different angles. Some of them would allow you to perhaps put them on top, which is not evaluated whatsoever. There's simply no discussion of the trade-off that can exist. And that still is central to the notion of an effective prohibition. When it says effective prohibition, what that means is how effective is the prohibition? And there's no nuance there from Crown Castle whatsoever. And again, it has to be up to the city to assess the extent to which there is a prohibition. How effective is it? How significant is it? And how does that bear on what the city's legitimate and recognized goals under cooperative federalism are to regulate the local right-of-way, to enhance the aesthetic experience of people? That is legitimate. And when you have no facts other than just bare assertions and conclusions, that is a situation where there's no question of where the law and where the authority lies. So I look forward to answering your questions when you have them. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay, so no comments from the public, or I'll have to ask you to leave. Thank you. So we're going to have 5-minute rebuttal from the applicant now.
Hi, all. So I'll speak a little bit and then we'll have Tyler and Suzanne speak a little bit too. So just wanted to address a couple of the things that came up. Crown is more than willing to be a good partner. Want to address the fact that we did withdraw and refile. We don't think that's an example of our bad faith or staff's inadequate review. We think it's an example of us working to provide additional information to help evaluate the sites and ensure compliance with the code. I also wanted to bring attention to the term tower that's been being used a lot. We're not proposing a tower. We're proposing a small wireless facility which has a specific definition by the federal government. It's not a 50 to 100-foot tower with 12 8x1 by 1 foot antennas in each of 3 directions. We're proposing 3 antennas that are encased in an 18 by roughly 30-inch shroud mounted at 20 feet. I'll take some time to allow Tyler to speak.
Tyler, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Michael. I just have a few points here. I'm going to go through these rather quickly. The first is on the alternatives. Alternatives have been thoroughly reviewed by our team as well as by staff, as noted in their presentation. One thing I wanted to draw attention to was that based on the licensed spectrum that's being used here, as well as the equipment being deployed, the 200-foot range is the range at which the signal dramatically decreases. This was noted by staff in their presentation, and the staff's third-party consultant also looked into this and verified that they agreed with that interpretation and that as being a reasonable range for this equipment and this spectrum. The last thing on alternatives is the median sites. There are no median sites within the range that we can provide coverage. So there are no median sites that are alternatives that allow us to meet our coverage objective. The alternative sites that allow us to meet the coverage objective are all sites that are not within a median. Pole top extensions were mentioned. Within the past 3 years, PG&E has stopped allowing pole top extensions. So this is something that cannot be utilized in order to provide the required clearance at pole top for our antennas. They are just not allowed by PG&E. The variances are limited and provided and explained in great detail in our application. These variances are all needed in order to comply with the requirements of PG&E and GEO-95. These, as noted by staff in their presentation, have been reviewed by staff and approved by the director. The last thing I wanted to mention was the California Professional Engineers Act. In accordance with that act, there is no such thing as a telecom engineer. This site is a civil infrastructure project, and therefore it falls under the jurisdiction of a civil engineer, such as myself. Staff have reviewed the application materials, and those engineers that have certified the application materials and have found that everything is in compliance with state law. That's all for me. Thank you, everybody.
Suzanne?
Sorry, it took me, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. I just also wanted to make a couple of points. One, the idea that we haven't put a lot of information in the record for this site is, and that, you know, the lawyer for the appellants is asserting that is incredible. The packet for this site is more than 300 pages. Most of those pages are pages that Crown submitted of detailed technical information, maps, alternative analysis, and everything else. And so I just really want to emphasize that this is a situation where, I mean, your ordinance requires a lot, and we stepped up and provided everything that was required and then some. I also wanted to address the idea that somehow the FCC rules and the Communications Act may not apply because this service, 5G service, might be used for other things other than just making telephone calls. I wanted to point out to you that the order, the FCC order that I referred to from 2018, is actually called in the matter of accelerating wireless broadband deployment by removing barriers to infrastructure investment. And so the FCC was very aware that 5G services would cover a range of services, and in fact said, I'm quoting from their order at paragraph 2, 5G can enable increased competition for a range of services, including broadband, support new healthcare and Internet of Things applications, speed the transition of life-saving connected car technologies, and create jobs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's been 5 minutes. All right. So that was the time for the 5-minute rebuttal from appellant and applicant. And now we move into commission discussion and asking of questions. So as a reminder, the commission has available Stephanie Hall, is that correct, on the line? And Stephanie has been contracted by the city specifically and only for this body of work to support the commission in terms of answering our legal questions on this matter. As a reminder, Lynn is representing Public Works. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. Who would like to go first? All right, Commissioner Robbins, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not shy, as you know. We've gone through a number of these over time, and I'm well aware that our role up here is actually somewhat limited. It's compliance, non-compliance, go down the line. But an area where I would like a little clarity would be to try and get some sense from city staff as to the alternative site analysis. I know this neighborhood very well. I live not far from it. I walk my dog down Warren probably every other day. So I know all the poles. My dog's visited every one of those poles. I, of course, clean up. And I looked up and I, in all seriousness, followed the list. I am a little concerned that there are no, quote, unacceptable or acceptable alternatives, only unacceptable ones. I understand the towers that are the poles that have transformers on them, which in my experience are actually more of a risk factor than any cell site, but nonetheless, they're there, and that's a limiting factor. But some of the others in this 200-foot thing, the islands, neighborhood association, I know there's at least one member of the association board here, and I used to be president of that board. They never like putting anything on the islands, but there are poles, existing poles on the first island as you come in from El Camino at Hurlingham, and then one on the third island, which is probably all the way towards Greenwood at the end there. But so that's context. What did the city do, and what's the city's view on whether there is any feasible alternative in here?
Yeah, I could go ahead and talk about that, Commissioner. So we looked at the alternative site analysis. There's a total of 19. I think the fundamental part about this has to do with the technical feasibility of the antenna that Crown Castle, the applicant, is proposing in here. The 200 feet limitation that has been well defined, I guess we could go back to the slide as well, and we verified with our own RF EME consultant that from our experience, the 200 to 300 feet limitation is what we have been seeing in applications. So this is our lived experience. What our RF consultant has seen in other jurisdictions in terms of these micro 5G sites is 200 to 300 feet is kind of the technical limitation that the industry is using currently. Now, a big asterisk on that is in a best case scenario. So as you saw in the slide that Crown provided that we also followed up on, it significantly drops in terms of its propagation after 200 feet. So Crown is designing a network off of already poor service is the way we look at it. So we verified that. So that immediately excluded a lot of sites outside of the 200 feet to be not feasible because of technology limitations. There were about 3 sites. Maybe we can go ahead and pull up the ASA again. We'll go ahead and share that. I think this will be better. All right. So here we are. So there are about 3 to 4 sites within the blue ring. The blue ring is represented by the 200-foot radius. And looking at those sites, I actually have another slide queued up here. I don't know if it's going to show. right? Maybe you could show we have a backup slide here because we suspected this would be a question, but there are other requirements such as PG&E does not allow small cell facilities if this joint pole is within 1 to 2 feet of a driveway, which a lot of these facilities within the 200 feet is. One of the proposed site there also has a transformer, and as you noted, is not allowed. Out of all the feasible sites, 19, but realistically, it's about 4 that's in the ring. We looked at them and they just were not feasible. We also followed up with some of the GO95 references in terms of spacing of utilities, and those are well defined in the engineering drawings, and those do not meet the separation as mentioned by the applicant.
Well, let me follow up a little bit. Having looked at all those sites and, reminding myself that this is about compliance, non-compliance, not necessarily what would be my personal favorite choice or whatever, or even neighbors that I know, their choice. And this is probably totally outside the realm of our purview, but did anybody think about putting 2 towers or one on each island at the ends, and that 200 to 300, they would probably overlap. Maybe the city isn't in a position to mandate that or suggest it or deny the application based on that fantasy that I'm bringing to the table, but is that something that was considered or could be considered?
Yeah, that's something that staff also had looked at as well. Now, we don't hold the model, right? So we can use what was provided in the aerial image, and it's very easy for us to scale an image in terms of a 200-foot radius. When we applied the 200-foot radius in the medians, it does not hit the target objective that Crown Castle is proposing in this site. Now, I think that's a fundamental aspect that we have to adhere by, right? I think we heard it from the appellant, we heard it from Crown. The city does not dictate the objective of what Crown is ultimately trying to achieve. And from the design, from the ASA, from the site layout, as well as the 13-page attachment 10 for the purpose and their technical objective, it does show in totality, they really have a really limited objective that they're trying to achieve. It's not our position to say, well, maybe if you open it up a little bit, we can go ahead and make something work. The reality is Crown has a very limited target. We have to obey with the laws and make sure that within the acceptable range is the most least obtrusive design standard number 1, as well as one that complies with our 21 design standard and ordinance. So that's what we're looking at it in terms of the lens. There's really 2 fundamental keys to that.
Okay, thanks, Jay. I'll defer. I may have some comments at the end, but that's my question. Thank you.
Great. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight. I know this is not fun for anyone. And thank you, Cliff, for those questions. I'm just going to segue right into mine from those. So with Crown Castle here today, can we, as wanting to be good partners, can we try and have sort of this solution or working together of considering this alternative that Cliff just brought up, or just being on the islands? That would be a lot less intrusive for the community. Is that something that you would consider taking away and studying those options and see if you would get the results that you want?
So you have to please come to the podium because there's folks on Zoom. Thank you so much.
So the issue with doing that is it wouldn't be compliant with the code. If we were to move it into the medians, it wouldn't be compliant with the code as it is.
Can you elaborate?
So putting it in the median, in that median, there's no pole to put it in. And so that would require a new pole. And that new pole is a lesser desired option under the code.
And what about putting it in on either end of the medians? On the 2 medians on the outside circle, if on that map?
Unfortunately, that would be outside of the, the immediate coverage objective that we're trying to achieve with this facility.
So it just won't be, Crown Castle refuses to consider those options.
So Crown Castle, the coverage objective is that immediate area. And so we can't move it past that 200 feet and still meet our immediate coverage objectives. So that's why we wouldn't move it to other islands. In terms of why we wouldn't move it into that island, it would be, we proposed where we proposed because it was a higher desired option out of the available options.
Okay, thank you. I do have a question, and I know this is already baked into our new policy, but I am wondering, why is it the least preferred option to put in a new pole? Because I understand, I think San Mateo has a long-term investment to put underground electricity in the neighborhood. And I know I live nearby, and we had to, part of our renovation, put in a high investment to underground our electricity, ultimately, I think, to remove these poles in the long term. So when we put in higher investments in it, doesn't that sort of defy the purpose?
I could touch on that question just a little bit. So in the 2021 design standards, there are a couple of criterias. One is land use. There's a preference for that. Then there are over a dozen design standards. One of the main criteria is pole selection in terms of the hierarchy. And it's clearly defined in our 2021 design standard. The criteria for pole selection is we want to utilize existing poles. And that's how the policy is refined. A lot of the decisions is based off of not further impacting right-of-way in our public right-of-way, because that could present potential challenges. So a lot of that has to do with the pole selection and how the previous design standard ordinance is written.
Okay. And then I have one more question. I wanted to confirm, if we were to approve the appeal and Crown Castle would apply again, would they then need to adhere to the new ordinance?
They would. It would be considered a new application.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Great.
Okay, so everyone, just so you know, Commissioner Robbins and I have been part of this since the original writing of the small cell ordinance, as well as Jay. That goes back 2016. So we got a lot of history with this. I also want to let you know, I spent an hour on site visiting. Not only Warren, but I went up the street, what is it, Hurlington? Did I pronounce that correctly? To look at some other sites as well, the alternative sites. So spent a half hour with Arena, Jeff, Linda this afternoon. So, and besides reading 300 pages of documents and emails. So I do have a couple of questions here, Jay. If this application was to be covered under the new ordinance, how would that play out? And I say that because now we have setbacks and not in front of homes or something like that. I don't know quite. Yeah, what would happen? Explain to us what would happen.
Commissioner, I just want to, for the record, we have not received one single application for the new policy and ordinance, but I could go ahead and highlight some of the main differences. So one of the main difference in the new ordinance and policy is there are restricted sites. And in this area, it would be considered restricted. Within 300 feet of a residential dwelling unit, this will be restricted. So immediately at face value, it would be one that is not allowed. Now, right. If you remember the presentation that was provided, we cannot prohibit wireless small cell facilities. So there are exceptions that need to be applied. And if Crown does decide to do so, or the applicant, an exception would have to be applied to go ahead and install a facility here. So that's at the surface level. Assuming they apply for the exception, we proceed. Another fundamental difference that I want to mention that Commissioner Michael had mentioned, which is how we look at applications. Fundamentally, right now in the 2021 design standard, that the appeal we're talking about, pole selection is fundamental in terms of what we're looking for.
Right.
It explicitly states they want to prioritize using existing poles and facilities. And if, as a last resort, then we will explore new poles because it is more obtrusive. In the new policy and ordinance, that is different. We now prioritize separation from residential homes and dwelling units. So it's no longer using existing facilities. It is how far can you separate this facility from a residential habitable area. So in this new policy, if applied, new poles would probably be the new norm. So it's quite the opposite of the current design standards that we're reviewing under for this application.
Sure. And thank you for that. The reason I asked the question is I think there's folks here who would like to have this moved under the new ordinance. And I'm seeing a lot of heads shaking, but I think as Jay is starting to lay out, that's not a panacea either. That's going to actually be more intrusive. So it's just something to think about. We're working within this ordinance, the 2021 ordinance, but I think moving it to the new ordinance, if this appeal was upheld, may not solve everybody's problem either. So, new polls. There was a question, Matt, this might be a question for you. There was a question from, is it Mr. Jones? Yep. We were talking during the break about how applications are selected for the new and the old ordinance. The new ordinance went into effect sometime in November. This application was submitted, I think it's October, is that? Yeah. So could you maybe walk through why we have these definitive dates from one ordinance to another from a management perspective or city policy?
I think the policy was adopted, most of the policy was adopted, I think, on November 18th. So most of the policy the new policy went into effect once the council adopted that on November 18th. So we can't hold anyone to the new policy for any application that was submitted prior to November 18th because it was not adopted by council until that time. The actual ordinance didn't go into effect until it was adopted by council at the second reading on December 9th, and then it goes into effect 30 days thereafter. So the actual new ordinance didn't go into effect until January 10th, I believe, January 8th or 9th. Yeah, around there, whatever 30 days after the 9th was. And so that's when the whole package went into effect. So there are certain aspects of the policy that didn't go into effect until the ordinance became effective, but the whole package became effective on January 9th or 8th or whatever it was. So that's the rules. It's the same thing like with a new building code, like any application for a home renovation, you hold it to the standard that's in place until the time that the actual application is submitted and approved. And so you don't hold somebody to a building code for a permit that they submitted under the old requirements. So it's the same sort of thing. We hold people to the standards that are in place at the time their application is submitted.
Okay. I mean, there's definitive processes and timelines to kind of keep things straight and fair. We'll talk about fair. Let's see if there's any more questions I have. And, going back to Commissioner Robbins' point, our role here is to really determine compliance versus non-compliance within the context of city code here. Let's see, I don't think I have any other questions. I will say I do visit every site, and as I mentioned to Mr. Jones, I've seen far more intrusive, relatively intrusive installations. This one at least is on between properties as opposed to in front of a property. But if I come up with any other questions, I'll say.
Thank you. Commissioner Kranz?
Well, good evening, all. You know, it's funny. I think to try and invite you into understanding, talk to a lot of people. I think it's safe to say that a lot of folks are going through Sacramento telling us where we can build apartment buildings and homes, FCC telling us where we can put antennas, and there's a bit of a mistrust and a feeling of powerlessness that you might be experiencing. So inviting you into understanding, where they're coming from. All that to say, got a couple of questions, and let's try and be efficient with our time. Taylor, are you still on the line? Maybe not. I'm sorry, I can't read my own hair. Tyler?
Yes, sir.
Hey, how you doing? Hey, quick question. So the 200-foot limit, it sounds like it's sometimes definitive, sometimes vaporous, could be misleading. So these antennas, are they directional antennas or are they omnidirectional, the nodes?
These are directional antennas. They're panel antennas. There are 3 of them in this application. And while they are directional, they do propagate with kind of, what's the right word? A zone.
Sideband.
Yes, like a band.
Sideband. Yep.
Yep. So they provide coverage in all directions, in some places better than others, but they are not omnidirectional in the sense of a typical 4G installation.
Because that was going to be my question. Would you be able to achieve a good service volume and get your coverage objectives, making it more directional, pointing it in the direction that you wanted it to be? When you aggregate a couple of these antennas, you could get to 300 feet. Is that technically possible?
It's not technically possible while meeting our coverage objective. So our coverage objective and our design is meant to maximize our ability to achieve that coverage objective. So the current application as provided is the best we can do with the equipment proposed to reach our coverage objective.
So is this a technical feasibility or a cost feasibility?
It is a technical feasibility based on the spectrum that is licensed through the FCC.
Okay. Couple of folks have had questions about fire risk. Are there backup batteries in this antenna array?
No, there are no backup batteries in this installation. And I would like to note that this installation is compliant with all applicable electrical codes. It is the same type of equipment as you would find in your breaker panel in your apartment or in your home. So it is standard electrical equipment that is compliant with all codes. And as was noted by the representative from the local fire department at one of the previous hearings, this is not a fire risk that is worth, even thinking about from his perspective.
Right. Yeah, I had a call with the San Mateo Consolidated Fire, and that was what I kind of came up with. Antenna locations, I think you're getting a lot of requests for that. I don't have a lot of technical expertise on whether or not it would work or not. Would it be? I mean, I'll be honest with you. I live over on Mariners Island. We don't have poles. It was built in the 80s. We didn't. Poles were obsolete then. So what you're doing in our neighborhood is putting them on the light poles. Seems to work. Don't know if that's something you would consider in these other, and I hesitate to use the word, I got to be careful with, I'm from New York, so sometimes I say things, but in spots where you have a raging dumpster fire of public angst, would those count as a one-off? You may want to have a second look at this. I mean, it's not every antenna in the city, it's just 5. Can they be mitigated? Can something be done to help out the folks that live there, to make this life better for them? Don't know. I mean, I'm just putting it out there. And to try and wrap this up, making this, it's funny, must be an engineer in the back. Real life numbers versus anecdotal or estimates. Have you guys thought about putting an antenna up, even on the end of a bucket truck, and measure signal coverage and see if it achieves objectives? Is there no attenuation that you would have normally expected? Does it actually work to achieve service volume and signal coverage? It's a question. I don't know, but I think it's worth having a look at it. For the one antenna that's causing all this angst, is there a way you can actually get real-time data to find out what's the story? So I think that's it. I don't know if we can defer this application while you check it out, or does it have to be terminated and start over again because of that shot clock thing? I don't know. I'm just trying to help, and hopefully this is something that makes sense. Okay, I'm done.
Sorry, Commissioner Krantz, did you have a question to Tyler at the end of like some sort of mobile data gathering or something? Did you expect Tyler to respond to that?
Well, it was more of a question for everybody. But if Tyler, if you want to weigh in on this, do you think you would be able to do a real-time signal coverage field strength, like I know in VHF you put a field strength meter up and you see how the antenna is doing. Can you do something like that in real time?
I think it's helpful to note that as part of the process, when an application is approved, after construction of the facility, there is a post EME report that is filed with your Public Works Department. So I think that might be what you're referring to, where we build the installation as approved by the city, and then we do visit the site to make sure that the emissions from that site are compliant with the EME report that was originally submitted as part of that application. More speculative part of your question, this equipment is all thoroughly vetted and is backed by many engineers who are specialized in these areas to make sure that we're maximizing the effects. So I think that's a little bit what you were asking about, is if it's the right equipment in the right way. And to achieve this coverage objective with the spectrum that we have licensed, this is the best equipment to do it. And these are the feasible locations to do it from. So I hope that answers some of your questions. If there's any more, or if there's anything else, just let me know.
Yeah, let me laser this down a little bit tighter. Is it possible because once the installation's up, it's up. Is there a way to have a look at the installation to see if it meets your objectives at an alternative site? Would that work? Could you vet it that way?
So that process has already taken place. So we have shown the objectives that are feasible to meet the coverage objective. And that is done through a process of engineering by the RF engineers. So basically, that is part of this alternative sites analysis process, is making sure that we're looking at the alternatives that are feasible to meet the coverage objective, and then evaluating which of those is going to be the least obtrusive. So, and that part has been reviewed by staff as well as the RF part, and staff is in agreement with the findings that we proposed in the application.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, there's only one spot on Earth right there that's going to work. Okay, all right, thanks.
Those are questions.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, great. So I did not actually say that you could speak right now, Ariel. I'm still going to ask my questions, and I might invite you to, clarify, but we are doing commissioner discussions right now. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, thank you so much for all those questions. I do have several, and so I apologize. Just trying to get some facts. So, Jay and Brian, thank you so much. Brian, it's nice to meet you. I don't think I've met you because I missed that other commission meeting if you were there. So nice to meet you, and thank you so much. So there was one alternative site that was like between 200 and 300, or it was like number 6. So was that looked at by staff, or was staff only process-wise, if you could recollect, process-wise, did you only look at and examine the 3 to 4 that was within that blue circle?
We looked at every single alternative.
All 19?
Yeah, all 19. There is a table that basically summarizes why it would work or wouldn't work for these applications, and we go through them and then we vet these as well. I don't remember specifically number 6.
There's one at like 238 feet or something. Sorry, 11, I misspoke. 11, like there was one that was like at 238, which was within the 200 to 300. Because I'm going to take for me personally, I'm taking what you're saying, staff, as fact that 200 to 300 is the viable range. So I was curious if you had done some analysis on the 200 to 300 part.
Exactly. Yeah. So we did it in two ways. One is we reached out to our RF EME consultant to see what the feasible range is, and the discussion, it varies a lot, right? Because clutter in a site-specific location has a lot to do with the dictation of the propagation, as we demonstrated also with Crown Castle, right? In the best case scenario, 200, 300 feet is what we've been told by our consultant as what she's seen in the industry. But if we look at the site, and Commissioner Rowinski and the rest of the commissioners have been out there, there's a lot of foliage, there's a lot of vertical obstructions, there are homes and et cetera, and staff considers that as well. Pertaining to alternative site 11, I think that is one, I'm looking at the map here, that is basically at the bottom left of the median. So it's on the outer edge of almost the 500 feet requirement that we require applicants to do an analysis. That is well outside of the 200 feet and the coverage objective that the applicant is defining, and it would not be feasible in that sense.
Okay, so sorry, that wasn't the one I meant. I did mean alternative 6, which is at 238 feet. I wasn't going crazy. 238 feet. Was that one reviewed? And could you walk me through, like, what is the process of staff reviewing the alternative sites? I read all the chart that's on page, I did because I sent you email before, but 242 to 243 in the packet. What is the process that you go through when you review these alternative sites? Like, do you go out and look at it physically? Do you just have a discussion with Crown about the alternatives? Do you talk to the RF consultant about each one of the alternatives? Just walk us through that, because I think that will really help the public also understand and create more transparency and trust building for everyone.
100%. So our process, we have Anchor Engineering that does the application review, and staff here is the oversight. When we get an application pertaining to the ASA, Anchor will go ahead and look at it. There's a couple of ways they look at it. They, if needed, will go out to the site and verify that the pole location is indeed there. I could name a couple of instances where the street view in Google, we do utilize that. Technically, we use Near Maps that updates their maps every 3 months, so it's more accurate than Google. But even though sometimes in those scenarios, the site visit is really important. So we either do a site visit and we determine it. We use Near Maps to go ahead and get an accurate representation with the last 3 months of what's actually out there. And we actually assess. If they state GO 95 separation cannot be met, they go ahead and state the case number and the figure as well in terms of what that is. In this scenario, they're proposing a 1.5 kilovolt application. So that's in the spectrum of needing 72 inches of separation. That's something that I think Tyler, as well as the appellant, had mentioned, but that's 6 feet of separation. So we look at that in totality. We don't take it at face value, and then we go ahead and check the GO 95 references. That is a glimpse of what we do ultimately, not just from our consultant, but also from our staff to go ahead and QA and QC that process as well, ultimately.
So everything you just described, like someone on city staff personally went out, or Anchor Engineering personally went out, or someone on staff personally looked at the better version of Google Maps, or Anchor Engineering personally looked at the better Google Map version. Just can you verify that?
I can clarify. We do not site visit every single alternative site.
So this one was not for this application, there wasn't a physical site visit by either staff or Anchor Engineering?
For this one, for site number 6, I do not recall
but
that.
for just no general, the permit, sorry. The permit in full.
I can tell you, I personally went out there for this one.
Okay, great.
Yes.
That's great to know.
Thank you.
So that's on process. I had a clarifying question on the effective prohibition, and Ariel, I am going to ask you a clarifying question here, if you don't mind, and cross-reference that also with Suzanne, who I believe is the legal counsel for Crown Castle. So Suzanne stated, if we approve this appeal and deny the permit, that's an effective prohibition. And I wanted to better understand your position on that statement.
Thank you, Chair Narita. I appreciate that. It's a perfect question. And so here's how it works. First, the city identifies their policy standards. So whatever design guidelines you have. The applicant then identifies whether they can meet them. If they can't meet them, then they may be entitled to federal preemption if there is what's known as an effective prohibition. The effective prohibition would occur under the traditional Ninth Circuit case law when a two-pronged standard is met. What Counsel for Crown Castle had identified is that FCC has created a sort of a subset, which they define as a situation where there is the applicant there's a material inhibition of the applicant's ability to densify, to provide new services, and there's one other element to that. But it doesn't change the underlying obligation to factually establish that that is occurring. So it doesn't change that in this instance, the focus has been on the assertion that the antenna only transmits 200 to 300 feet. But that does not give you any information about the coverage objective that they seek to use. So we've heard coverage objective a lot as though it means something, but it doesn't tell us any information. And Counsel for Crown Castle has said to 300 pages or something like that in application. None of those pages define that. You should ask, I recommend, Chair, what page specifically tells you what that is. And back to the case from October with Berkeley, where that judge held in this same district that where Verizon said to provide improved services coverage to an area of 1.6 square miles and a population of 2,420 residents, but did not identify an underlying factual basis for the statement, that did not qualify to force Berkeley to prove that non-compliant antenna.
So I have a clarifying question.
Yes, please.
Ariel. So basically, effective prohibition, my understanding of effective prohibition is basically it's a prohibition in name, which means that there is literally no other possible alternative whatsoever in any possible fashion than what is presented to us as this design in this location. Is that your understanding of it?
Not at all. Let me clarify. What it means is effective prohibition in the ability of that carrier to provide personal wireless services for those customers. So, for instance,
I think we're saying the same thing, but I think I said it strangely. So let me clarify. So because I'm trying to get clarity here. So basically, my understanding of Crown Castle's argument is that, but for, and I'm an attorney, can you tell? But for this site with this specific design, there's no other possible path forward. That is your understanding of their statement. Is that correct?
That seems to be, but I want to clarify my understanding of what the actual legal standard is. And it relates, I think, to something that Commissioner Robbins asked about whether you can use multiple sites. So required findings 1E does identify that you have to confirm that that even multiple alternative sites that are more or less intrusive would also be infeasible. So I think that the but-for standard is the right way to understand it under traditional Ninth Circuit precedent.
Okay, thank you.
What I want to make sure that I'm getting across very clearly is that the starting point is not that the applicant says, I want here, is that the applicant has explained the coverage objective. That they have said the coverage objective is this geographic parameter. Then this area, the DBM is whatever it is. That we have certain aspects of coverage here, but not indoor. And they provide those maps so that you can see, by having the coverage in this 200 square feet or this 200 foot by 200 foot area, we're able to mesh these different areas together. You have none of that information.
Okay, so, thank you. That's clear, Ariel. That concludes my need for your insights at this moment in time. Thank you so much. I want to go to Stephanie. If Stephanie Hall, are you on the line?
Yes.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you so much for bearing with us. Really appreciate you in attendance. So I think I hope you heard my kind of clarifying question here. So essentially, my understanding is that Crown Castle's statement is essentially this site with this exact design is the only thing that will work. Is that an accurate, for the commission's purposes, do you find that to be an accurate statement of their position?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and then, So essentially, that is their reasoning for why basically if the commission were to accept the appeal and deny the permit, that would be an effective prohibition.
I want to clarify, Crown Castle would file a claim that this is an effective prohibition, but then a court would have to make that determination. So
Of
they're
course.
not, you see, yes.
So can you walk us through what would happen at that point?
So yes, Crown Castle could file a claim that this is an effective prohibition in violation of federal law. And then ultimately a court would make that determination. And, I can't say with certainty how a court might rule in this particular case. We could look to some of the cases that were discussed tonight. But yes, a court would ultimately make that decision. And also, I believe one of the commissioners asked about, I think someone said deferring. I did want to mention parties can enter into a tolling agreement to toll the shot clock. I just wanted to clarify that. I don't know that the parties would have to come to an agreement on that. So Crown Castle would have to agree to it.
Could you explain tolling again?
It's basically an agreement where the parties say we're going to pause the shot clock or else the shot clock would run out. But once again, both parties would have to agree to that.
Thanks. And Stephanie, is the commission allowed, and from a legal perspective, to ask Crown Castle what exactly does coverage objective mean, or is that outside the scope of what a local jurisdiction is legally allowed to inquire about?
I think for purposes of tonight, if you have questions for Crown Castle, you can ask it for clarification.
Okay, great. And in your legal opinion, we had basically, and I think you were on the line, Stephanie, at the time. Were you on when Jonathan Kramer, the expert on telecoms law, gave the commission the presentation?
I believe so. I think I know which one you're talking about.
Okay, so at that meeting, he basically said there is always an alternative site. And I asked Jay this question offline, and Jay responded very kindly and said, that is true. And when you cross-reference that with our design standards, it can lead to only a singular site, basically, is the position of the city. And so I was just curious, what, in your experience, does that happen often in other cities where essentially the cross-referencing of design standards and just what is technically feasible otherwise leads to only one possible location for this piece of infrastructure?
Honestly, I'm not sure I can speak to that. It's not really, I'm not sure that's a legal question. Maybe I'm not.
Just have you heard these types of arguments being made in other proceedings that you have overseen, you have monitored in other cities?
I don't have enough experience to answer that.
Okay. And so essentially, I think also legally speaking, what is your legal analysis of effective prohibition? I understand what Crown Castle's position is, but I'm curious about what you would advise this commission in terms of the definition of effective prohibition.
Can you repeat that question? I apologize. I'm not sure.
That's okay. I understand what Crown Castle's position is in terms of an effective prohibition, but I would like to know, in your legal expertise, for the purposes of this commission, what do you think an effective prohibition would be in this sense, with these facts at hand?
Saying that they essentially can't provide the personal wireless services or their objective if the city were to deny this permit.
And so is coverage objective defined legally at all anywhere in relevant case law or relevant legislation?
If someone else can speak to that, I don't have that on hand.
Okay. And so in terms of coverage objective, do you think there is a range of what coverage objective could potentially be? Or is it a singular kind of, I'll know it when I see it and it's a business decision?
I'm not sure that's a legal question. Can staff speak to that?
I don't understand what coverage objective means. And so I'm just kind of understanding, like, is this a legal statement? Is this a business is this like a business decision? And I don't understand how the city interacts with the statement coverage objective.
Chair Narita, I will answer this after attending Jonathan Kramer's exact presentation that he mentioned. If you recall in that presentation, coverage objective is kind of a gray area as he would define it. Now, from the perspective of how we understand it, we don't have authority to dictate what that is because as defined by Jonathan Kramer, telecom law firm, there is no threshold of what coverage objective is in terms of whether it be service, capacity, if it's 90%, 80%, 70%, it is up to the carrier ultimately and the applicant to decide that. And that was something that was presented by Jonathan Kramer itself. So in theory, what this is alluding to is we can ask for more information and the applicant has provided a lot of information in terms of what their objective is. But the city does not have the authority ultimately to define whether their objective is correct or not in terms of the threshold.
Not correct or not, but I think my confusion is the coverage objective, they can just state something as coverage objective or not, which basically is a no, I'll know it when I see it standard, where essentially until like that is just something that is like the business case. And there's no discussion or conversation around how to achieve coverage objective in a different way. And I don't understand procedurally, like, are they allowed to just state something is coverage, like, is the coverage objective, and like that is just legally defensible whole cloth. Like they state it and it's like attorney-client privilege, right? It's privileged, and then all of a sudden everything is privileged. Is that the same kind of thing? Like this is covered, like this is coverage objective, and therefore you can't even inquire about it. I'm a little confused.
I don't think we cannot inquire about it. I think that's why in the purpose, in the technical objective, there's 13 pages of document that explains what that is. There's documentation in terms of being site specific to the design plan, the site layout, the alternative site analysis that really defines what that is. In terms of the business decision, staff is not here to determine or dictate what that is.
Yeah.
I think that's something Crown or a legal interpretation can go ahead and figure out. But from staff's perspective, we're not here to define what that is.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah.
I had a question for Crown Castle then.
Did you have a question for me or?
No,
Come up and hopefully one of us can answer for you.
I'm not sure who the questions were. So what, if you could say in layman's terms, what is the coverage objective?
I would say that it's to densify the network in the area immediately surrounding the site by introducing new millimeter wave coverage.
What does that mean?
So we're densifying the existing network. So the existing network can only provide so much bandwidth to the users in the area, given what it's using to provide the service. The millimeter wave spectrum is another piece of the radio frequency spectrum that's being utilized by our client to provide additional bandwidth to the users in the area. So we're taking the network that's there and we're making it better and more useful, introducing a new piece of the radio frequency spectrum in the immediate area surrounding the pole.
Okay, and just the immediate like 200 to 300 feet-ish area.
In
right?
this particular instance, it's that roughly 200 feet because the signal strength drops off so dramatically at around that 200-foot range.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, you have more questions. Sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, don't run away. On down. So the airlines are in the business of delivering people. You're in the business of delivering packets of information. And that might speak more to your coverage range, your coverage objective. How many packets with a check digit on both sides can you effectively transmit without a breakdown? That's the more kind of exact answer to the question. You're all due respect. I thought your answer was fluff.
Okay.
All due respect. So why don't we get to the nitty gritty? You're trying to make a system that you can have less drop calls, less loss of bandwidth, less can't get my movie to play. how does that coverage objective of you delivering packets to people on their televisions and their phones, how does this 300 feet affect you delivering what you promised to deliver?
I'm a little bit confused by the question.
You might want to talk to, I swear I'll get this right, Tyler, because it's more of an engineering question. I'm just a little suspect, this whole 300 feet thing. Additionally, just a quick one, maybe for Jay and for Tyler, you mentioned that it's a directional antenna. It's got waveguides. It goes, but yet the picture is of a circle, which would be more of an omnidirectional antenna. Can you reconcile that in my head as to which is it? Are you beaming out a signal in a direction like you would do with a directional antenna, or is it a omnidirectional antenna which is encompassing that circle? Because that's going to affect, and possible defoliation if there is a tree branch in the way, that's going to affect the 200 feet if you clip the tree branch. And I'm not trying to be overly simplistic. I'm just trying to be real time, real world with this, trying to get to a solution. I'm done. What do you got? Can we fix this?
I could go ahead and answer from a staff's level. When we review the ASA, it's approximately 200 feet. And I think it's important to put into context when we take in the live experience from our consultants, that 200 feet is the range that's possible, right? So it's 200, 300 feet that is within the range of this technology. One of the main components I want to reiterate is how site-specific conditions, foliage, things affect that. So 200 feet to 300 feet from our RF EME consultant told us is the best case scenario for this type of technology. Just looking at the site in itself in terms of some of the obstructions, qualitatively, you can come with a thought that, okay, roughly about 200 feet best case scenario, you look out there are trees, there are other types of obstruction, more likely it's probably less. So in terms of the circle, that is not, from the way I view it, it's not a exact representation, but it's an accurate representation within the range.
Okay. All right. And last question, maybe
to answer a part of your question there, Mr. Commissioner. You asked about the antenna and how it is in a canister form. That's actually a radome. So per the design standards, we have the panel antennas located within that radome so that it has that canister shape. So they're actually panel antennas within that radome. And related to packets of information and how much data we can transmit and provide, that is not in the purview of the ordinance or the design standards, and that is not up for the decision of the commission here tonight.
Yes, but you're using it as a cudgel to get your point across. And that's the part where I kind of get sideways with this. You're using that as a point of fact, 200 feet, but when quizzed on, so tell me, how did you get to that? Oh, we can't talk about it. And it's not like music where I'll know it when I hear it. That's music. That's not music. This is pretty scientific. It's engineering. We have the data. And it's to me, it's a little bit, I just don't understand why we just can't be explained correctly what we're looking at. Anyway, the other question I had was maybe for the council, and I don't want to step on any landmines here, but is there some resistance to putting these antennas on islands? And again, I don't live there, so I don't want to get in the middle of this, but am I sensing something? Because I'm hearing from the people and I'm hearing a little bit, we don't want to maybe do islands. Is that?
So, I mean, I think you can direct questions to the staff. If you want to, do you want to staff that, Commissioner?
The island is something that has been explored in other applications as well. So I just want to note that in totality, staff has seen proposals in island. We're talking about 124 Warren specifically in this scenario when we looked at the alternative site analysis. That is not within the range of the coverage objective that is defined by the applicant. Again, we don't state that. That is well within the 200 feet in their technical limitation. So that's why in this scenario, it is not feasible. Now, another thing to also consider in this older ordinance in the design standard is we cannot cut down trees. That is something that we cannot do. There's a design standard, I forgot it was 5 or 6, that prohibits us from really removing trees. Now, a little bit trimming here and there, that is allowed, but qualitatively just understanding the submittals that have been submitted through multiple carriers, if you do install it in a median and there are no trees, great. What we have seen from multiple applicants is if there are trees, that presents a problem, because as demonstrated in Crown Castle as well as our RF engineer, trees significantly disturbed the propagation of the transmission of the antennas. So theoretically, we're not against medians, just to be clear, but it does not, in what was proposed by the coverage objective, does not seem feasible in this scenario.
Okay, and thanks everybody. I'm trying to kick over as many rocks as possible so that for the people that we serve, we can say that we did a good job. We did our due diligence, and we come to a reasonable understanding, almost like an MOU of what's going on. Thank you.
Right. No, sorry, this is discussion time among the commissioners, so Vice Chair Michaels?
I just have a quick question that I think this conversation was helpful. So in this, I'm still looking at the map with the blue with the 200 radius. So all this effort will ultimately just help those 6 homes because of the nature of this community and how it's spread out. Like, that's the benefit of this entire project? Or I guess that's for Crown Castle, or?
I think that may be a question for Crown in terms of why they would lean to the investing this asset to contribute to this home. That's the coverage objective. I think that would be something that's.
But it is correct that it is only in this 200 feet vicinity then that the benefit would occur.
Yes, from documents they presented.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, please.
And I know we're focused on this particular appeal, but in the packet, there is a proposed network. It's a nice map that shows proposed and installed small cells throughout the city. So, and I'm wondering too, we're focusing in on this particular 124 Warren installation, but yet there's a big network out there. And I guess this might be a question for Crown, is in the event this the appeal is accepted and there's no installation, does it impact the other small cells that are slated to be installed in San Mateo Park? I'm just looking, I know we're looking at things at 200 feet, but there might be a bigger picture going on here, and that's really the genesis of my question. And maybe they're very independent, I don't know that, but Crown's been, I'm looking at the map now, and Crown's been pretty clear where they're going to put these. I'm sure this is not like throwing darts in the dark there, but that might be just it's a kind of a follow-up on your question there. Any thoughts, Crown? Oh, thank you. And, part of this too is, I'll share, people are also concerned about these other installations that are slanted. I'm seeing heads slanted for San Mateo Park. But, these are all throughout the city. Anyway, please.
Yeah, so I appreciate your, higher level view of this, right? So we are looking at this specific site, and we need to be, we're looking at whether or not the application was complete for this site. But the site is part of a larger network, like you said, right? So, and it's part of a larger network of small cells, but it's also part of our client's larger network too, right? So we do have a network, and I'm looking, I think it's roughly 10 or 12 other sites in the San Mateo Park area, right? And all these sites were placed roughly equidistant from one another in order to kind of get the best out of each of the sites. When you densify the network, and you are also offloading capacity from the existing network, right? So all these work together. There's going to be a site, there's going to be a space where this site, if it's denied, the network's not going to be as good. But when you look at all of these together, they offload capacity and make the existing network better too, because then the existing network that was providing service in those areas doesn't have to provide service in those areas. So it can, so let's say, people within the 200 feet of the site, now their signal's going to that site. So now the existing network that was there can provide one more service or 5 more services to someone, to other users within that particular site's coverage, right? So again, we're talking small cells, small wireless facilities versus macros. A large macro tower between 50 and 100 feet is going to have a larger footprint, as if you're going to be providing services to more individuals. And so when you can offload capacity from one of that, then you're opening up capacity for other users as well.
Did you have more questions? Okay. I have some questions about design now, not the alternative site. So Jay, when it comes to the design standard, what was your thought process? What was the staff's thought process and analysis in terms of all these variances? I found this to be quite a unique application given the multitude of variances. And could you walk me through how that intersected with the design standard, that we have for the 2021 ordinance?
Yeah, it's similar to how we discuss about pole options. At the forefront, when we're reviewing these applications, we're consistently looking at utilizing existing poles. Now, one unique feature in this neighborhood that is not found in others is there are not a lot of streetlights in terms of Cobra Head streetlights. So that is another reason why the potential solutions are limited, because if you go to, say, North Central, you go towards a more commercial area, see it in arterials as well, there are these TS15, TS30 Cobra Head streetlights that mount anywhere from 24 to 30 feet that have these antennas installed. And they're plentiful, right? When you combine that with joint utility poles, there's a lot more options. So we look at it from that lens. We looked at the limited exceptions in terms of what we want to grant to see if there's any validity. One of them has to do with overhang in terms of the roadway or the sidewalk. Our code currently states that we want them on the sidewalk unless it's not feasible. Well, there's a guide wire there, and we looked at that.
What is a guide wire?
A guide wire is ultimately a metal wire that hangs from the side of the pole. You probably see it quite often. A lot of times it's for stability purposes. It's there. And in order for that, you have to basically relocate that or request it from PG&E. A lot of times that's not something that's plausible. In this scenario, we don't know, but in our qualitative experience, it's difficult. We granted a limited exception to say, okay, it could be on top of the roadway, but there are variances and safety considerations. One that we talked about is clearance. This has about 18 feet of clearance. So we looked at it in the site-specific nature. 18 feet, what does that mean? If you look at California, Department of Transportation, Caltrans, the bridge clearance is about 16 feet for commercial vehicles. So that's on a highway commercial vehicle. This is at 18 feet. Clearances, it looks good. It's about 4 feet. A parking space in the area is about 7 to 8 feet in width. So this is about half of that. We didn't see any concerns issuing that. In terms of its overall length, our current design standard, and not saying it's right or wrong, but the current way it's written is
the 2021 way.
The 2021 way, it's 24 inches. Now that might be applicable if it's on, say, a city streetlight, but when you're on a joint pole, PG&E has its own separation requirements, and that is at 36 inches. So that's the minimum separation allowed for an antenna. That's to be placed there. You add that up with the actual diameter of the antenna, you get 4 feet 9 inches is something that seems plausible for us in consideration.
So let me pause you right there because I just got a little lost. So PG&E requires 3 feet of an arm for this kind of a pole. So why is the design not at 3 feet? Why is it at 4 feet 9 inches rather than 3 feet?
It is 3 feet of minimum separation, but if you consider the diameter of the actual antenna, that adds the total overhang into the roadway at 4 feet 9 inches. So it's about 18 inches.
So the antenna the thickness of the
Thickness, yes.
antenna is another 1.5 feet,
Yes.
essentially,
Yes.
roughly.
And
So
that's
then-
depicted in the engineering drawings.
Yeah, so yes, this is also part for the public, Jay.
I appreciate it.
So basically, you have to have 3 feet cleared, then the infrastructure can start. And so that's the start of the antenna. So that part, my understanding is there's 3 antenna, like pointing in different directions. Tyler, there's 3 antennas pointing in different directions, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And so what happens if one of the antenna, like why do you need all 3 versus 2 of the 3?
We need 3 antennas to propagate to meet our coverage objective.
Which we don't know exactly what the coverage objective is, right? Like, I mean, we have a really beautiful talking point, but we don't actually know like the exact coverage objective.
Is described in the application materials to the satisfaction of staff.
Why don't you say it to me right now for the public?
It's the immediate area around the pole, so roughly 200 feet surrounding our location.
And so basically, the statement of fact from Crown Castle is we must have 3 antennas in these 3 different directions. That is 4 feet, 9 inches out into the street.
And the 4
Right.
feet 9 inches out in the street, as Jay accurately described, is because of PG&E requirements.
Yes, great.
And just
So
to clarify a little bit on the 3 antennas, so they are propagating in different directions. So if you didn't have one, you'd have a whole sector or roughly 120 degrees of coverage that's missing. So it's reasonable
that's right.
to achieve a coverage objective all the way around the pole that you would need 3 antennas.
Yes, I completely understand. And why I always get a little confused about this is because when Kramer says we don't need to maximize a company's coverage objective, what I'm getting confused on is if you're saying that if your statement of fact is that 3 antennas is the minimum for your coverage objective, or if you're trying to maximize your coverage objective. And to me, the fact pattern is not clear enough for me to understand if this is a minimum or a maximum coverage objective.
The proposed design is the minimum required to meet our coverage objective.
The minimum required, that's a statement of fact.
Documents.
Okay, thank you. So Jay, have there been other designs like this in the city? Like to this extension of 4 feet 9 inches?
Yes, there has.
Where are they?
I'll have to look it up to see where we have other sidearms. I don't remember off the top, but I do remember we have approved a lot of sidearms.
Of that length? Of this exact length? Because I understand we would have approved one for 2 feet out per the design standards, but 4 feet 9 inches out is significantly longer.
I'll have to look at our database and respond back and give you an address for that one.
Okay, so we don't, right now, factually, we don't know if there's been ever another site with this long of an arm.
Not that I can recall at this moment.
And do we know if there's any safety considerations with a length of arm this long? Is there less structural integrity to have a length this long versus shorter? Like what basically, why did the city choose 2 feet, but is fine with 4 feet 9 inches on a technical basis, I'm asking?
Yeah, good question. So there's a couple of ways to assess this. I think I mentioned in terms of its right-of-way clearance, that's one of the ways to assess safety in our aspect. Another way is their structural analysis that they have to provide. So Crown went ahead and did that for this pole. Anchor Engineering, our review engineer, actually is a structural emphasis in terms of reviewing this. So they have reviewed it and determined there are no structural safety issues.
Okay, so like in the face of the next storm or the next super windy, crazy windy days that we have, this is not going to fall on a car. And that is the city statement?
Per our structural engineers that have stamped this submittal, as well as our review, that would be, now again, if you tell me, I don't know what type of scenario you're talking about, but under the risk category that this is reviewed under, yes, it would meet that.
Okay, great. And so Finally, design-wise, what was the conversation between staff and Crown Castle on the just design aesthetic in general?
In terms of color palette or?
All of it.
Yeah, so I want to say Crown Castle is, how would I say, is no stranger to submitting applications with the city. We have dialogue every Tuesday and we review submittals. And it is a progressive approach to go ahead and get the best facility for the city. We discuss freestanding poles, we discuss color palettes, we discuss sidearms, and we ultimately decide one that is the least obtrusive. And it is a work in progress ultimately for every application. And there's a lot of discussion that goes on to make sure that occurs for the best interest of the public. But ultimately, when we look at the sidearm and what is the alternative, which is a freestanding pole, by the 2021 Design Standard and Ordinance, this will be determined as the least obtrusive.
And so my understanding though, so even with all the variances, the fact that we want an existing pole trumps all other considerations in the design standard. Is that an accurate statement of the city's evaluation criteria?
I wouldn't say all, but it is a big deciding factor in terms of what we're trying to look at in the lens of the current design standard and ordinance.
So there's a median in front of the house. It wasn't listed as an alternative site because Crown said, and I accept this as a statement of fact until proven otherwise, that there is no pole there. Is that accurate to you, Jay, as well?
When I looked at the median there, I did not see a pole identified.
So hypothetically, just hypothetically, so I can understand where the confines and parameters of the city's design standards are, if Crown Castle had said, hey, city, there's no pole here, we'd be willing to build a pole here and put the small cell in this median on a new pole. And we would like to do that. Would the city had said, actually, what you need to do is build it on the one in front of 124 Warren, and you need to, we'll give you all the multitude of variances in order to do that because that's an existing pole. That's what I want to understand. Like, is this, yeah, just answer me that, I guess.
I think that would ultimately depend, right, in terms of what we're looking at. I mean, this is a hypothetical talking about a median, whether it would actually be in an effective area, because looking at it in street view as well as driving through, there's a lot of foliage there. But say it wasn't obstructed and it's theoretically possible, we would consider the obstruction in the right of way and whether there are pedestrians and whether there are other factors that go into there. Now, if there isn't, and it really ultimately is not an obstruction to the public right of way, we would look at that objectively and try to see if it's least intrusive. That would be something we would do.
Okay, that's super helpful. So Tyler, did you look at that median as an alternative site option with a new pole?
We did not, and the reason for that is because per the 2021 design standards, if there's an alternative that would meet our coverage objective, even with variances, that would be a less obtrusive design per the design standards than installing a new pole.
We just heard from Jay, though, at city staff that would be open to a negotiation, though, right? So what I'm hearing is that you did not contemplate providing that as an alternative in the analysis.
And that is not something that's required by the design standards and the application process. And staff has found that we've completed everything to the extent of the application standards and documents and found to approve our application, considering in their presentation what they described as the least obtrusive option.
That's true, but I think in terms of the legal definition of effective prohibition, I no longer believe your legal counsel statement that only this site and only this design would be coverage, like would meet your coverage objective, like that.
I think the point.
Well, hold on. So like that, I think that is, in terms of the threat that she made to the city and to this commission, in terms of whether or not, we would accept or approve or deny the appeal.
An application for a new pole at this location would be rightfully denied because there is an acceptable alternative through variances per your design standards. And Suzanne, please chime in on your previous statements.
Yeah, so I mean, I want to emphasize, right? I mean, the reason that it comes down to this one site is because if you look at the alternative maps, right, there were 4 or so sites. I don't have it in front of me. I can only see my name on the screen in front of me now, but there were 4 or so alternatives within that 200-foot blue circle, right? And only one of those 4 or 5 was technically feasible because of a variety of different reasons that we've walked through, right? Some had transformers on them, some were too close to a driveway, right? And you even saw that staff went to the extra work of looking at all of those and gave us pictures of the other 3 that were in there. And so we were just left with one, right? And we were left with one under the city design guidelines, right? Which was the use of an existing pole. And I really want to emphasize that in the FCC's small cell order, right, the reason in some ways they were being more restrictive with cities is because what they were looking at was very small sized antenna deployments that were going on existing utility facilities in the right of way, right? We already have poles, we already have wires. They're not the most attractive things in the world, right? And we're adding a wireless antenna to something that is already a communications facility and an electric facility. But the FCC said in their small cell order, right, that a state or local legal requirement will have the effect of prohibiting wireless telecommunication services if it materially inhibits the provision of such services. We clarify that an effective prohibition occurs where a state or local legal requirement materially inhibits a provider's ability to engage in any a variety of activities related to the provision of a covered service. And this is a covered service. This test is met not only when filling a coverage gap, but also when densifying, that's their word, the FCC's word, a wireless network, introducing new services like the 5G services that Crown is introducing, or otherwise improving service capabilities. So that coverage objective that we have is expressly consistent with the small cell order, right? I'm not saying that, you know, always in every circumstance, there's only one site that works, but in this particular circumstance, given the coverage objective, which as you heard was to provide new services, densify, add capacity in the area around the pole, right? There were only a couple of other alternatives that would have met that objective, the technical objective, the coverage objective. And of those few that were there, only this one we're allowed to build because of other issues, GEO 95 clearance requirements, transformer requirements, adjacency to driveways, et cetera.
Oh, I completely understand that, Suzanne, and thank you so much. My issue, though, is that we just heard from the city that basically there could have been other conversations at hand. That's what I'm saying in terms of the statement of any sort of denial is in effect, which was your early statement. If you deny the permit and accept the appeal, this is an effective prohibition. It doesn't actually sound like it is in fact an effective prohibition because, you know, there are other conversations to be had about other sites. So that's why I'm getting a little turned around on that.
But we were acting consistent with your guidelines, right? And your guidelines.
I think the fact is that the guidelines, what I'm hearing though from staff is that the guidelines are just guidelines. You're treating them as strict constructionist, like legal text, but they're guidelines. And so I think that's the distinction that I'm hearing. Yes, Jay.
Chair Narita, I want to clarify in the hypothetical situation that you presented, there is a scenario where a freestanding pole will be the least obtrusive, but I want to just reinforce that in our standards, the applicant is required to look at within 500 feet radius, every single existing pole that is there and have to deem them all non-feasible for us to consider the freestanding pole. So that's
it's a trigger. So essentially what you're saying is it is in fact like the high rule is that only existing poles.
Yes, but
and then you can Frankenstein that existing pole with 20 million variances. I'm being hyperbolic, Jay, but I'm just trying to test the boundaries of our guidelines.
Yes.
You can Frankenstein that pole with 20 million variances, and that is actually better per the guidelines. And so then going to a new pole.
That is correct. And the hypothetical situation you have mentioned, there are locations within the city that has been applied where there is no feasible existing poles that Crown Castle then had to look at freestanding poles. So to talk about the situation of, okay, would the median work? If none of the existing pole works, then yes, that would be the next step in trying to find a feasible
Okay, so that's
site.
super helpful, because essentially what I'm hearing is that the design standards were kind of poorly written on that. No offense, guys who were like here during that time, but but basically the design standards are leading us towards a road where we would create aesthetically really ugly crap. Like, no offense, Crown Castle, but just real ugly, like aesthetically like stuff, because it has to be on an existing pole before we ever would contemplate putting up the new pole. That is the position of the city.
That is the position of the design standard. And not saying it's, right or wrong, but the new ordinance and the policy
No,
has
we can't.
been
I mean, I'm not
adopted.
even. I don't even care about the new ordinance, because we're like. Sorry, this is the lawyer in me. I don't even care about the new ordinance right now, because that's not what's under consideration.
That is correct.
What I am trying to really explain and understand for the public and exhaust from a legal standpoint is the full boundaries of our design guidelines. So our design guidelines state that we are required to have the applicant use an existing pole if technically feasible, with any amount of variances that would be needed to make that pole technically feasible.
Yes.
That is super helpful to know.
Chair, may I point you to the portion of the guidelines that you were discussing right now?
Sorry, what, Ariel?
Sorry, may I point you to the portion of the guidelines that you were discussing right now, since I don't believe that they read the way that you are construing them?
What I am taking, so you have it, my understanding is that you have a different interpretation of the guidelines, but I'm
No, I
going,
wish to read the guideline to you so that you can determine what it means.
sure.
Great. And here says, if the application proposes a wireless facility on a new pole or structure, the applicant must identify all existing potential poles or support structure within 500 feet of the proposed site along the subject right-of-way that is available and technically feasible. Now, I think the question you need to answer here, Chair, is that what does available mean? Does a city determine something's unavailable because it has 50 protruding pieces of junk? Perhaps it does. It doesn't say anywhere the pole selection is the least preferred. It simply says that that's a process that an applicant must use in order to be eligible to use a freestanding pole.
Jay, what are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts is exactly as I stated, the ASA requires them to look at all existing facilities that are out there, and we have to exhaust all of those options before we consider freestanding poles.
And basically, they did not exhaust all options because there was that one that's right in front of this. The Warren one is right. Like, that is actually technically feasible.
Yes.
And available.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, guys? Yeah.
There somewhere. How wide is the street at that point where the pole exists?
I do not know that off the top.
8 feet, pretty close.
The street width?
Yeah.
It would curb to, I mean, I guess it would.
Yeah, it's.
Take a wag.
It would, 8 feet would be very narrow, I would say.
8
One,
feet. I was there
So the
today.
pole could, so the next median, the next available opportunity across the way, and this is the law of unintended consequences in a good way, would be so close to the existing pole that is under question. There you go. If you were to go across the street with I know how distasteful this is, it costs money, put the pole across the street, it's a new pole. You could even put the antenna array on top of the pole, centrally coaxially located, so you don't have to have the arm sticking out. And you'd be able to get the height, be able to get the higher height so you can get your signal out a little bit further. I think it's a win-win. It's at least worth looking at.
I just want to clarify, Commissioner Krantz, is 17 feet is the street width as denoted in the design drawings.
Okay, so it's close enough that it's for practical purposes, it's co-located. It's a bird could tell us a little bit further. You standing on a street could, but the packet of information going down the street to the next house, it's invisible. It's the same virtual distance. Yeah. That's it. That's all I got.
have a
Through the
comment.
chair, can I point you to that section also, the design guidelines?
No, sorry. Let's continue with commission comments.
So yeah, the street is 17 to 20 feet. Since I was there, since, for an hour today. And the island, which I looked at extensively, is heavily wooded.
Okay.
So you would be removing trees,
Or just go higher.
possibly.
But it's
a lot
moot.
of cost to go across the street.
And by doing the cost benefit analysis, we'll figure out if this is worth it.
Through the
Well,
chair, can I
yes.
make a comment
Yeah.
on this? Besides noting that it's actually an island full of historic cork oaks, and you don't even want to go down that path. But more importantly, that's outside our purview. I might think that's a great idea. We could do it, and if we were drafting the design standards differently, or if we were staff or the applicant, but our review is narrow. It's compliance with the application, with the law, the code, and the design standards. And what I personally would like, I suspect several of us could agree to it and go raise money and do it, but that's not within our purview.
That's right.
My 2 cents.
Anyone else have any comments before we go to decision? Okay, I do have comment, which is basically, I hope you know what you're doing, Crown Castle, because this seems really, really combative with the public. And given all these various alternatives and ideas and creative solutions and willingness to collaborate, and this is outside, again, to Commissioner Robbins's point, outside the purview of this commission, but it certainly seems like bad PR and just bad community engagement and relationship. And I don't know if you maybe don't expect a long-standing relationship with the city or what, but it certainly seems like we're wasting a lot of time when there are different alternatives, and you probably spent more time and money on this this appeal with a very expensive and lovely attorney on the line and Tyler on the line, than otherwise you would have to. So I'm just a little perplexed by this, but so be it. If you want to have bad relationships with the public in your community, okay, let's go to decision. Can I get a, what do I do? Motion? Sorry, I'm a little tired, y'all. Motion. Okay, can I get a motion to approve or deny the appeal?
And what is staff's recommendation? Deny?
The staff's recommendation is to deny the appeal and approve the permit.
And I think we either vote on staff's recommendation.
I have in my script, we can either have a motion to approve or deny the appeal.
Okay.
Do I have a motion to approve or deny the appeal?
Nobody wants to do it because nobody wants to piss anybody off, but I'll be blunt. It is, again, our duty, our obligation here is to review whether the application is, whether we like it or not. And I'm in that neighborhood, so I'm not too excited about it. But whether the applicant or the appellant has demonstrated noncompliance with the code and design standards, and it's their burden of proof, I don't think that that's been met. So yes, I would move that we deny the appeal and uphold the conditional approval. It's not my favorite, but it is what we are obligated, in my opinion, to do.
Do I have a second?
I have a second.
All right, can we get a vote?
Commissioner Robbins,
Aye.
Commissioner Rowinski,
Aye.
Commissioner Kranz,
As much as I don't want to do this, and in light of cancel culture, sure,
Vice Chair Michael,
Yes.
Chair Narita.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0 in denying the appeal.
All right. Well, I think everyone knows how we feel. So, moving on to reports and announcements. Are there any other reports and announcements? Hearing none? Oh, Matt, you have a report and announcement.
Yeah, just to let the commission know that our anticipation is that the next.
Wait, hold on one second. Public, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate the time and attention, but please be quiet as you exit. Totally respect the fact that you want to leave, but we still are conducting business. Thank you so much.
Anticipate that the next several commission meetings are going to be more of the same. We have at least Jay and Ryan, how many appealed permits do we have at this point? Five additional ones.
I think as of right before this meeting, there's currently going to be 6.
So we
For
have
different properties or the same?
all
these are
6 different applications.
6 separate applications. So I guess based on, given that it's 10:21, we probably spent 20 or 30 minutes at the beginning of the meeting with general public comment and approving of the minutes, but we probably spent 3 hours on this. It would be helpful to get some guidance from the commission in terms of how many appeals would you be willing to consider at a particular meeting? It seems like 2 would be the maximum.
Because is the question of the scheduling wise, we would need to schedule a special meeting? Is that the consideration?
I think we may need to look at polling commission members about scheduling some special meetings, trying to get through this.
Because of the shot clock?
Also recognizing that it's going to be difficult for us to accomplish any other business of the commission if all we have is appeals. And so we do have other items that, would ideally need to be coming to the commission. And so we will need to try to squeeze those in as well. So
Can there be a negotiation with Crown Castle to toll the shot clock?
I think most of these are being approved at the end of the shot clock. And so I don't know that that's an option. I think all the approvals have happened at the end of the shot clock. So I don't think tolling the shot clock is an option at this
Oh,
point.
why is that? Sorry, I don't understand.
They've been approved at the end of the shot clock. So the shot
Also,
clock.
the staff has exhausted all.
Yes.
Okay. I see. Did you have something?
Say, Chair, we can ask, right? But I think as mentioned by Crown, there has to be an agreement. So we can ask Crown on these applications, but ultimately there has to be agreement if a tolling is something that is explored where feasible.
I think that would be great to inquire and negotiate that because this is incredibly burdensome for staff and for us and for the public. And we want to do a good job exploring all of these facts. And it's exhausting.
I will second that, especially if Crown Castle is sincere about maintaining a good partnership.
We will try.
Yes, we will check in with Crown on that, but we are going to have to continue bringing appeals. So we will likely look for an email from me or from the staff in terms of pulling on potential additional dates for special meetings. But expect that we've got at least 6 more appeals that are going to be coming your way, either 2 at a time or I'd like to think that we could get through 2 of them in one meeting, but based on tonight, I'm not sure that that's.
It takes however long it takes to find the facts. That's what the
I'd like to just
ordinance
go on the
contemplates.
record as saying I feel even more rewarding that we've changed the law to allow appeals that under the new law to not come to this commission, to come to an expert. And it's not just because I don't want to spend the time on it. I think
It's incredibly
we get
burdensome.
educated get into the technicalities, and I'm afraid they're all fascinating and valuable, but not necessarily within our power to do anything about it.
Well, it's within the discretion of Crown Castle to potentially reevaluate all those applications to avoid that. Otherwise, we'll spend 21 hours together, and so be it.
That's all I have. Thanks.
Okay. Any other announcements?